If I may have your attention, we can start the session on fundamental freedoms. My name is Frane Marojević. I'm the new director of the Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media as of 1st of September. It is my pleasure to be the moderator of this session. And to, first of all, introduce the session, we will focus on the current situation of media freedom across the OSCE region and outline some of the main threats to freedom of expression and freedom of the media. The idea is also to discuss ways to increase the safety of journalists through better and more efficient implementation of the OSCE commitments. We will also look into the issues such as the treatment of the media by the authorities of the OSCE participating states, as it's clear that many governments still continue to regard media as a dangerous instrument that needs to be controlled and sometimes silenced. We want to also look into the issue of ways of citizens can obtain and impart pluralistic information. So the current situation on freedom of the media and freedom of expression and media pluralism across the OSCE region are the main focuses. We also want to examine some of the recent legislative and political efforts aimed at protecting national security that can also pose threats to these freedoms. We want to also discuss ways to deal with propaganda for war and hatred during conflict, access to information across the OSCE region, and see what are the good practices to strengthen freedom of expression both online and offline, and also self-regulation. Some of the questions that have been outlined in the introduction to this session is, what can the OSCE participating states do to improve the implementation of the existing media freedom commitments? What is the role of the governments of the participating states, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, journalistic associations and media organizations in supporting media pluralism? How can the participating states better ensure that media can work freely and independently, and importantly, under safe working conditions? And how can the authorities become more effective in ending impunity for masterminds and perpetrators of attacks and other crimes committed against journalists, including when reporting about conflicts? Ways to and measures to deal with propaganda for war and hatred, especially during conflict coverage, and what progress has been made regarding the criminalization of libel and defamation in the OSCE area. So it is my pleasure to introduce, we have two opening speakers at the beginning of this session. First is our representative on freedom of the media, Ms. Dunja Mijatović, who has held this post since March 2010. She is an expert of over 20 years working in human rights, communications, media strategy, regulatory and policy media framework. She has extensive knowledge of institution building in transition states and many years of experience in issues regarding journalist safety and new technology, with an emphasis on digitalization, convergence and internet technology. Also, it is my pleasure to introduce our second keynote speaker, introducer, Jacob Mchgama, who is the founder and executive director of Justitia, a Copenhagen-based think tank focusing on human rights and the rule of law. He is also the co-founder and co-director of the Freedom Rights Project. He has also worked as a corporate lawyer in a Danish firm, working on human rights, teaching in human rights at the University of Copenhagen, writing and commenting extensively on human rights in various international media. So it is our pleasure to have him also with us today to have an introduction. After the introductions, we'll have, of course, an opportunity for all of you to make comments. Just so you know, we have plenty of interest in this particular session, so the time will have to be unfortunately limited to 3 minutes. So I would ask you at this point to keep your interventions brief and to the point, so we can have everybody have an opportunity to speak. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our representative on freedom of the media, Ms. Dunja Mijatović.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished representatives of civil society. I'm pleased to once again open the session on the current status, or to say state of affairs, of media freedom and freedom of expression in our OSCE region. Our session is short if we think about all the problems we are facing, and I will be brief to make sure that everyone who wants to make a statement will have some time. I would like to extend a special warm welcome to all journalists present here today and members of civil society, and thank them for the important contributions they will make. This is a unique forum where we bring you at one table, governments and civil society, and everything in order to improve the situation. And that is why I think it's of utmost importance that even using a diplomatic language that we ought to be, we also need to think about truth and about justice in our OSCE region. I believe that this year has been marked by one event which casts a shadow over the participating states and defines the era in which we live. The events of January 7th in Paris, when 12 people, including 8 journalists, were killed for cartoons that are regarded as disrespectful, even disgraceful, by some parts of our society, which is legitimate. I mean, we should not always agree on what we like and what we do not like. The horror of the attack against Charlie Hebdo lies in the notion that someone can be killed and have others defend the action simply because they express views that offend. But please remember, we do not have the right not to be offended, no matter how much it hurts. Since when is murder a defensible outcome of the expression of an opinion, of satire? Violence against those holding a different opinion is simply unacceptable. Governments must publicly refute such terrible crimes, and the perpetrators and masterminds must be swiftly brought to justice. Although they may be a crude indicator of the shape of media freedom today, the raw number do tell a story, a very depressing story. Since we last met, my office has documented more than 60 attacks on the media which resulted in property damage, personal injury, and even death. As I asked the Permanent Council of the OSCE in June, have we grown cold-hearted about what happens to journalists? Have we become so accepting of reporters being assaulted and shot that it no longer has an effect on us? Have we grown fatigued at hearing about their troubles and just accept violence as being part of the job? I refuse to accept this as a modern-day truth. It is my job, and one I take seriously, to come to the defense of media where they are assaulted and threatened. And that, unfortunately, is taking place across the OSCE region at an alarming frequency. When looking at the developments of the last year, my first thought is how much the issue we struggle with today are similar to the ones we faced a year ago, and several years ago. Given our limited time here today, I will recall only a few specific cases. But it doesn't mean that there are no more cases to be raised. We must start with the case of Azerbaijani journalist Khadija Ismailova. As you all know, Khadija Ismailova was recently convicted in an Azerbaijani court on charges of misappropriation and embezzlement, illegal business dealings, tax evasion, and abuse of power. Having been detained for 10 months, she was sentenced to more than 7 years in prison. The charges and the trial are unjust. She should be released now. The punishment is inhuman, and the result is yet another terrible stain on the human rights records of Azerbaijan. Khadija is now one of the 12 journalists in prison in this country. Let us make no mistakes. Let us be very clear. Jailing critical journalists because their work could expose corruption and uncover misdeeds committed by those in power, not necessarily the governments, is also violence against journalists. It needs to be seen as such and treated for what it is: an open attack on the cherished and hard-fought right to freedom of expression and freedom of the media. Last September, members of a BBC crew, Steve Rosenberg, Elizaveta Shuvalova, and Maxim Lomakin, were attacked in Astrakhan in the Russian Federation. The cameraman was beaten, their equipment was destroyed, and their video material was erased. In January, journalist Sergei Vilkov, also in the Russian Federation, was beaten by two persons near his home. Independent media are continuously targeted in the Russian Federation. Journalist safety is at an all-time low. Impunity for crimes against journalists prevails, and laws infringing free expression and free media are constantly introduced and enforced. Instead of ensuring protection and independence of members of the media, the authorities are effectively limiting the space for public debate and the citizens' right to freedom of information. In Turkey, critical voices are being systematically threatened and harassed by the powers of the state. And still, many journalists face long prison sentences for reporting on matters of public interest. The media freedom situation in Ukraine continues to be challenging. On one hand, good and transparent laws ensuring free expression and free media have been adopted in close cooperation with my office, which I appreciate very much. But at the same time, the issue of impunity is still not being addressed by the authorities in Ukraine. And overbroad restrictions that curb free movement of journalists are introduced. Only last week I called on the President of Ukraine to amend a decree banning numerous journalists from a number of the OSCE participating states entering Ukraine, introducing overbroad restrictions that curb free movement of journalists is not a way to ensure security in our countries. Unfortunately, there are more and more states banning journalists from traveling from one state to another, sometimes even deporting them. Many states present here. Such actions run against the spirit of the Helsinki Final Act, and this is the reality of our OSCE region. In Hungary, members of the media were beaten by the police while covering the refugee crisis at the country's border with Serbia. The members that were beaten of a crew of Radio Television Serbia and broke their equipment. A journalist from Poland's public broadcaster TVP was also beaten and detained for a day, together with an Australian and Slovak journalist and the Associated Press photographer, who was briefly detained. Police trying to uncover journalist sources raided the offices of the news portal Kliksba in Bosnia and Herzegovina last December, seized the media outlets' equipment and documents, and detained the editors and the journalists for questioning. Several members of the media received death threats and were attacked in Croatia in the last months. B92 editors Brankica Stankovic and Veran Matic, as well as the two other journalists in Serbia, still live under police protection due to threats to their lives. It is positive that Serbia, our chair in office, is working on resolving the killings of journalists that took place in the 90s. The Commission tasked with supporting the investigations is producing results with a trial for the murder of Slavko Čuruvija, currently underway. However, there is still a prevailing impunity for attacks and threats against journalists that have taken place in the recent years. Harassments of journalists often take more traditional forms. As is chronicled by a parliamentary commission on organized crime in Italy, which reported recently that Italian media had been the subject of more than 2,000 acts of violence, intimidation, and threats over the past 10 years. Government's actions aimed at curbing our right to freedom of expression and media freedom can and do take many forms. And they also pop up in unexpected environments, surprising many of us by their very anti-democratic nature. We remember the events in Germany early this summer when we learned that a treason investigation had been started against the owner and a reporter of website Netzpolitik that had been reported on the government's plans regarding online surveillance. While I was pleased to see that swift and harsh reaction by the German public and the authorities, it is worrisome to witness any efforts in well-established democracies to threaten journalists with prosecution for treason for reporting on the issue of general public interest. In the United States, we saw local prosecutors in Missouri pressing criminal charges against 2 reporters caught up in a civil disturbance in 2014. Reporters should not face fines and prison sentences for covering a civil disturbance. Authorities in France blocked websites this spring for allegedly causing or promoting terrorism and passed anti-terror legislation last November enabling the blocking of websites without judicial oversight. Several laws were recently adopted in Spain that represent a clear setback in the protection of free speech, and in June, Canada adopted anti-terror provisions that can also harm the right to free expression. Recalling the types and frequencies of harassment that took place against media in the last year is always a sobering exercise. But the most difficult part of this stock-taking exercise is that this year, just like last year and the years before, there were journalists who lost their lives while working. In addition to the killings in Paris and in Copenhagen, Ukrainian photographer Sergei Nikolaev was killed on 28th of February during an artillery attack near Pesky, a village north of Donetsk. Oles Buzina, former editor-in-chief of Daily Segodnaya, was gunned down on 16th of April by 2 masked men near his home in Kiev. In the United States, reporter Alison Parker and cameraman Adam Ward were killed on 26th of August at a park in Virginia by a former colleague. And in Azerbaijan, journalist Rasim Aliyev was beaten by a group of people in Baku and died in the hospital on 9th of August. As I say every year, it is important to remember that the threats on media freedom and freedom of expression exist in every participating state. That's right. There is no participating state where media freedom could not be strengthened and improved. However, the severity of the problems and the impact on media freedom greatly differ from one country to another. And in far too many countries, the severity and frequency, systematic frequency of attacks, intimidation, and harassment against the media not only continue, but they are on the rise. In some states, there is a very serious decline of media freedom situation. This situation is made worse by the fact that the authorities systematically reject the existence of any problems and therefore do not engage, as they call in a constructive dialogue with my office, in any form of discussion or cooperation. Denial is the way to deal with the problems, unfortunately, by many participating states of the OSCE. We cannot, as I previously said at the opening, talk about constructive dialogue with me and my office if we keep ignoring problems, if we keep saying that there is nothing wrong in our participating states and that everything is fine, and that I'm interfering in internal affairs or independent judiciary or crossing the line of my mandate. I strongly disagree. The digital environment has made journalists more exposed and vulnerable. Female journalists are increasingly being singled out and attacked on the internet. For some, online threats of rape and sexual violence have become part of everyday life. Others experience severe sexual harassment and intimidation. Last week, my office hosted an expert meeting to help increase our understanding of the issues involved, identify best practices, and discuss possible solutions to tackle the mounting number of online threats. I hope by acting now we can, in a way, diminish greater problems in the future. Before I conclude, we must look at the proliferation of hostile propaganda that we have seen unfold in the OSCE region. As I noted earlier, propaganda is an ugly scar on the face of modern journalism. I said this many times, and I can see it's quoted a lot by the media worldwide. But that's how I see it, particularly coming from the country that experienced propaganda before, during, and after the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Unfortunately, propaganda as a tool of war is nothing new. It is my responsibility as the OSCE representative on freedom of the media to warn how dangerous propaganda for war and hatred can become for security and cooperation in Europe when it dominates the public arena. When through twisting and misinterpreting facts, spreading false stories, creates hatred and divisions, prevents individuals from freely forming their opinions, and distorts media pluralism and the open exchange of ideas. The governments have committed themselves in the Helsinki Final Act and the Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights to prohibit by law propaganda for war. And what do we have now? This means that they have the responsibility to stop corrupting the profession and to stop sponsoring propaganda. As the state media is the main vehicle of such propaganda, it should be transformed into true public service media or privatized. It is the highest time for governments to get out of the news business. And I'm sure that the governments will recognize themselves. In accordance with their international commitments, the governments have the responsibility to stop propaganda, not to spread propaganda. Finally, I will ask the question that I ask every year. Are the OSCE participating states making practical, systematic progress on the issue of journalist safety? Do journalists have reasons to feel safer today than they did a year ago? My answer, similar to last year, remains no. Once again, we need to ask ourselves how we can move ahead to safeguard media freedom in an environment where several governments clearly lack the political will to implement the related commitments, or are pretending not to understand those commitments, let alone agree on additional ones. As the media provide newer and newer ways to help people access and depart information, the unease or even fear of many governments of the power of the media only increase. The good news is that the governmental restrictions, while they can be terribly effective, can only silence critical voices in the short run. In the long run, history shows that governments stifling media freedom and freedom of expression pave their own demise. There is no long-term prosperity if we do not live in a society where people can freely express themselves. I would like to conclude with this undoubtedly critical, although in my view realistic thought. I look forward to the upcoming discussion, to hearing your comments, concerns, and suggestions about the above very important issues. I know that many statements that will follow will be again denying that there is a problem. And I'm very much aware of the fact that many of you have to read what you received from your capitals. But at least if you can go home by thinking that there is a problem and something needs to be done, I would have more respect in agreeing to the position that diplomatically you have to say that everything is fine, but at least you go home and you know that absolutely nothing is fine. As long as we have journalists imprisoned, intimidated, harassed, beaten on the streets of the OSCE region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Representative Mijatovic. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jacob Michigama. Jacob.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a profound honor to be addressing this important forum today. I especially want to thank Representative Mijatovic for inviting me, so thank you. 40 years ago, the Helsinki Final Act was adopted, committing Europe to a framework of human rights across the Iron Curtain. The Helsinki framework empowered dissidents in closed societies, giving them a voice that contributed to the defeat of totalitarianism. Among the freedoms most cherished by those dissidents was freedom of expression, as highlighted by the famous Charter 77, whose drafters complained that freedom of expression is inhibited by the centralized control of all communication and cultural institutions. But while the Helsinki Final Act ushered in a period of renewed hope and optimism by piercing the wall of censorship and repression, today the Helsinki process legacy of furthering freedom of thought, conscience and expression is being rolled back. Not by a totalitarian superpower, but by 1,000 cuts of often more sophisticated and sometimes even well-intended restrictions. And these are dark times for freedom of expression. According to Freedom House, global press freedom is at its lowest point in 10 years, with noticeable declines in Europe and Eurasia. As of 2015, by my count, 26 journalists were imprisoned in OSCE states. These, of course, include Azerbaijani investigative journalist Khadija Ismailova, sentenced to more than 7 years in prison for doing her job by exposing corruption. From 2010 to 2015, again by my count, some 21 journalists have been killed in OSCE countries, some by extremists, others seemingly with impunity and indifference from state actors. And while on paper, freedom of expression remains a cornerstone in most constitutions and indeed in international human rights law, in practice, freedom of expression is subject to an ever-expanding list of buts. And worryingly, this development affects both democracies, countries in transition, and autocracies, creating a vicious cycle and a race to the bottom on free speech. Let me try and get specific. Terrorism is a very real problem threatening innocent lives and political stability. In fact, terrorism may itself constitute a threat to freedom of expression, as we saw with the attacks against Charlie Hebdo and a free speech debate in Copenhagen, creating an assassin's veto that spreads fear and self-censorship. As such, governments obviously have a right and a duty to counter this phenomenon. But counterterrorism measures also risk erring on the side of restrictiveness. A few examples. In Denmark, a man was recently convicted for glorifying terrorism on social media for, among other things, sharing quotations from the Quran. In the UK, a woman was sentenced to 1 year in prison for downloading an Al-Qaeda magazine despite not being involved in terrorism herself. In France, more than 50 people were charged with glorification of terrorism only days after France's president and other world leaders had declared freedom of expression inviolable as a response to the Charlie Hebdo massacre. And in Turkey, 3 journalists from Vice News were recently arrested on manifestly absurd terrorism charges, with freelancer Mohammed Ismail Rasool still languishing in jail. And amid a climate increasingly hostile to independent media, Turkish prosecutors have also launched a terror-related investigation of the Dogan Media Group. More generally, surveillance measures adopted by Western democracies have been used to target journalists and human rights defenders, affecting the ability to expose potential abuse of counterterrorism measures. A development that has enthusiastically been mimicked by more repressive states with sometimes disastrous consequences for independent media and civil society groups. I know that many of you present here today are working tirelessly to counter the evils of discrimination and racism that once again is rearing its ugly head on a continent where so much misery has been caused by ideas of national, ethnic, racial, and religious superiority. And of course, one of the most contentious issues relating to free speech is to which extent expressions that are deemed offensive or hateful should be prohibited. UN conventions, EU law, and case law from the European Court of Human Rights has made clear that international human rights law does include red lines when it comes to content. But I would argue that it's time to reconsider this approach and ask ourselves a fundamental question. does a genuine commitment to tolerance, equality, and non-discrimination really depend on restricting the very freedom that has made possible the articulation and spread of new and progressive ideas, from religious toleration to the abolishment of slavery, the equality of the sexes, criticism of apartheid, and the rights of LGBT persons? Almost without exception, every movement fighting for progress in human affairs has been met with censorship and repression. And those who carry the torch of progress and freedom today should think twice about adopting tools of those opposed to progress, even when their intentions are pure. It also seems to me that there is very little evidence that restricting free speech helps defeat intolerance. In fact, it may be counterproductive. Let me offer you a few examples to think about. In 2010, Dutch politician Geert Wilders was on trial charged with hate speech for his well-known anti-Muslim statements. Yet 6 months later, before the conclusion of the trial, he had won 15 new seats in parliamentary elections. No doubt the publicity and opportunity to play the victim during the trial helped his appeal. The former leader of France's Front National has been convicted of incitement to hatred numerous times, and in 2013, a case was being prepared against that party's current leader. Yet Front National seems to be more popular than ever. While minorities may be hurt and offended by disparaging comments, insisting that freedom of expression be restricted to protect them from racism and offense is also a very dangerous game at a time where far-right movements with questionable commitment to liberal democracy are on the rise. It should not be forgotten that Geert Wilders wants to ban the Quran, the construction of new mosques and Islamic schools, and that Marine Le Pen wants to ban religious headwear, including the Jewish kippah. The freedoms that allow bigots to bait minorities are also the very freedoms that allow religious minorities, such as Muslims and Jews, to practice their faiths freely. By further eroding these freedoms, no one is more than a political majority away from being the target rather than the beneficiary of laws against hatred and offense. And history tells us that minorities will be first in line when political winds change for more repressive ones. In the context of the OSCE, with its diversity in member states and their form of governance, it is also important to warn against how such laws may be abused by governments to target dissenting voices. It is worth repeating the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, who during the drafting of Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights warned that prohibiting hate speech, quote, would encourage governments to punish all criticism under the guise of protecting against religious or national hostility. It is also worth remembering that not a single European democracy voted in favor of Article 20 in the Third Committee of the UN's General Assembly. Roosevelt's warning would soon prove prophetic. While the drafters of Charter 77, including Václav Havel, spoke of freedom and human rights, the Czechoslovakian chief prosecutor determined that the Chartists had committed a crime, quote, by clearly pursuing the aim of evoking hatred and hostility towards the socialist state system of the Republic. The danger highlighted by Roosevelt has not disappeared with the end of the Cold War. In Kazakhstan, journalist Alexander Kalamov was held in prison on remand for months and subjected to forced psychiatric evaluation after being charged with incitement to religious hatred for online atheist criticism of religion. In Russia, a woman was investigated and had her laptop confiscated for incitement to ethnic hatred after linking to documentaries on the Ukraine conflict on her social media accounts. In Belarus, human rights defenders were banned from holding a rally protesting war and political prisoners on the grounds that the rally promoted extremism and ethnic hatred. Outside Europe, the member states of the OSCE are working hard to expand hate speech laws to include criticism of religion. How can these abuses be effectively countered if democracies themselves adopt vague laws against hatred and extremism, and when human rights defenders don't oppose such flagrant violations on principle, but want to draw an inherently blurred line less restrictively? The problems I have highlighted above are deepened by an incoherent patchwork of international standards and major differences in approach by international institutions. The European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, under the Council of Europe, for instance, has allowed both blasphemy bans and Holocaust denial laws as compatible with freedom of expression, and it also affords member states a wide margin of appreciation when it comes to terrorism and hate speech. The Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner has gone even further, proposing a Europe-wide ban on gender-based hate speech and Holocaust denial. On the other hand, the United Nations Human Rights Committee has clarified that blasphemy bans and memorial laws are incompatible with freedom of expression in Article 19 of the ICCPR, and that ratifying states must demonstrate the strict necessity of all infringements with freedom of expression. And these discrepancies matter, because differences in the protection of free speech creates loopholes and help legitimize further restrictions on freedom of expression, even if adopted in bad faith. Memorial laws provide a depressing case in point. Such laws can be used to entrench specific versions of history used to bolster those in power and marginalize opponents. In Ukraine, new laws have criminalized the denial of the crime of communism during Soviet times. Russia, on the other hand, has made it a crime to distort the role of the Soviet Union during World War II. Quite literally, one country's truth is the other country's crime. And while denying historical crimes is morally reprehensible, only academic freedom will allow historians to offer compelling evidence of past crimes that we may use to avoid repeating those crimes in the future. I'm therefore delighted to be sitting next to Representative Mijatovic, who has insisted that hate speech must be fought with more free speech, and who has resisted the call to lower the bar on the plethora of sensitive issues that make up the list of buts. If adopted internationally, such an approach would entail a much more robust protection of freedom of expression and much less leeway for those states who seek to silence criticism. Rather than new and futile attempts to ban extremism and hatred, including on social media, we should be heeding the call of Representative Mijatovic by doubling our efforts to counter the narrative of religious extremism. We should expose, criticize, and ridicule the racists and the bigots, and we should mobilize the forces of tolerance, equal citizenship, and non-discrimination. And in that great and noble endeavor, freedom of expression is part of the solution, not the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michigama. Now we come to the point where I can give the floor to the audience according to the speakers list. I would just like to note that we have almost 50 speakers already signed up, so the time will have to be very limited, and I'll have to be very strict with the timing to 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and my colleague Joan here will help me with that. I would just like to ask you, those of you who will take the floor, to first introduce yourselves, name of the organization as well, to keep your points brief and to the point, and I would discourage you from reading pre-prepared statements, because you can always circulate those later, which can be then distributed to all the participants. So I will also tell you who is the next on the list, so you can prepare yourself. So first we have the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, followed by Charter 97.org.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear ladies and gentlemen, allow me to greet you at this important meeting. My name is Ahmad Shahidov. I represent Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. Today we have concerning problems which directly impacts Europe, and along with human rights issues, Europe needs to think about its security. In fact, security and human rights are correlated. I won't specifically note here freedom of media and self-expression, as the lack of these freedoms are the main problems of our society. If we look at the countries where wars exist, we observe that freedom of media fall behind. The environment of intolerance negatively influences freedom of media. In my view, this is not the problem of one country and one society. As for my own country, Azerbaijan has several problems on freedom of media and self-expression. On my way to Warsaw, I heard that the journalists of Maidan TV have been arrested at the airport by police, and they were taken into custody. Following the custody procedure, they were released. As a human rights advocate, it worries me, and I call on Azerbaijan government to put an end to this sort of incidents. This is crucially important as we are going to have parliamentary election on November 1st, and freedom of media is important during pre-election period. On the other hand, problems on freedom of media are experienced not only in Azerbaijan, but also in developed countries in Europe, including in the United States of America. Shooting of Alison Parker and Adam Ward, the AIDS incidents that occurred over the past 5 years in the United States of America. But emphasizing consequence of these incidents, years when they occurred, and the reasons The American expert tried to dismiss the links among the incidents, but what happened in Virginia contradicted all the theories. I would like to address to Mr. Ambassador, to Daniel Bayer, who became an expert on making statements as a countries. Mr. Bayer, you are expected to talk about your own country, inform us on motives of a serious killings in the United States of America. At the end, I would like to talk about intolerance tendencies in Europe as well. The condition of Syrian refugees in the border of Hungary and the way of Hungary journalists treated made us to think again. Osama Abdul Mohsen and his young son Zaid made headlines globally after they were tripped over by Hungary journalist Petra Lasso. I think journalists' job is to get information, and this is done by Europe journalists. We have to think about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to sticking to the time. Next is Charter 97, followed by the delegation of the European Union to the international organizations in Vienna.
Наталья Радина, главный редактор белорусского.
I'm Natalia Radnova. I am the main editor of our website, and I'm a journalist representing the delegation. I was shocked by the fact that today at the plenary session, we heard a lot of positive changes that are apparently taking place in Belarus, or allegedly taking place. In fact, there are no positive developments. There are no systemic changes taking place in the country. Yes, we have been trying to obtain the release of political prisoners in Belarusian prisons for the past 5 or 6 years. But as one of them has said, the only reason any liberations have taken place is because it became too expensive for the state to continue to keep these prisoners. We live under conditions of dictatorship, and when the elections take place, there is the threat, the danger that they may be recognized as free and fair elections. This is certainly not what is happening. We would not like to see a similar situation to that in Turkmenistan or Azerbaijan, where journalists were recently arrested. So no one contests that there is a dictatorship in Belarus. With respect to freedom of expression and freedom of speech, we are dealing with a threat of limiting our access to the internet. This took place including in the context of the murder of a journalist in the past. And almost all of the media that remain in Belarus work on a basis of self-censorship. So please be honest and do not lie to yourselves about the fact that, in fact, there is a dictatorship in Belarus. And we see that the regime in Ukraine is also receiving special treatment from the West, and we believe that it should also be closely observed. Thank you.
Just waiting for the interpretation. Before passing the floor to the delegation of the European Union to the international organizations in Vienna, followed by the United States of America.
Thank you, moderator. Our statement has received the alignment of Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and San Marino. Mr. Moderator, freedom of expression remains a top priority for the European Union. The EU is deeply concerned about the downward trend in many participating states, a trend that is threatening our common security. While recognizing that we all have shortcomings, the EU's recommendations to participating states are three. One, take urgent steps, including reviewing and revising existing legislation and practices to improve the implementation of the commitments made on freedom of expression. Two, recognize that freedom of expression is a key component of the concept of comprehensive security by putting it at the forefront of OSCE discussions, including at the Ministerial Council, in the Ministerial Council preparations. Three, draw on the expertise of the representative on freedom of the media and engage constructively on issues of concern while respecting her mandate. We have heard Director Link this morning saying that we should concentrate on recommendations, and this is what we do. The rest of our statement will be circulated in writing. But I don't want to finish the statement without taking the opportunity to warmly thank the representative on freedom of media, Mrs. Mijatovic, and her team for their excellent work. Dunia Mijatovic, you continue to act with integrity, professionalism, and impartiality, and the European Union stands by you and your mandate. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I would like to now give the floor to the United States of America, followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The United States extends its deep appreciation to Representative on Media Freedom, Diana Mijatovic, for exemplary and tireless service and work, and for her strong statement here today. We gather again in a climate of diminishing space for freedom of expression by members of the media and increasing threats against journalists and bloggers in numerous places across the OSCE region. The United States remains deeply concerned by the cumulative effects of laws enacted in Russia last year, imposing strict control over information on the internet, punishing vaguely defined extremism, and imposing greater legal liability on bloggers. New legislation on undesirable foreign organizations and Russia's continued stigmatization of domestic NGOs under the Foreign Agents Law have had a chilling effect. Additionally, Russian journalists continue to operate in a dangerous environment and culture of impunity. Murders of prominent journalists from Novaya Gazeta, one of Russia's last independent papers, remain unsolved, while journalists still there receive death threats. In July, journalist Yevgeny Khamaganov's neck was broken during a physical attack in Buryatia. Russia's crackdown on freedom of expression has reached beyond its borders. Its occupation of Crimea and its campaign of aggression in eastern Ukraine have included threats to and violence against journalists. In regions under separatist control, there have been hundreds of cases of assaults, abductions, detentions, threats, and intimidation of the media. Meanwhile, 11 Tatar media outlets in Crimea have been shuttered, and independent-minded journalists have been searched, harassed, or expelled. In Azerbaijan, the government's closure of offices of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and its unjust imprisonment of investigative reporter Hadija Ismailova and other journalists have narrowed the space for freedom of the media and expression, and I wish to associate the United States with the strong comments today of the representative of freedom of the media on the disturbing situation in Azerbaijan. Even family members of media professionals in exile have been detained on questionable charges, including relatives of Ganimat Zahidov and Amin Mili. The representative on freedom of the media has highlighted the detention of more than 20 media professionals in Turkey. During the June parliamentary elections in Turkey, ODIHR expressed serious concern that media professionals critical of the ruling party were subject to pressure and intimidation during the campaign, and we have seen efforts to shut down Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Hungary has also cause for concern in the area of media freedom, and Freedom House has cited the declines in that country. Central Asia, another place of concern, and let me just close, Mr. Chairman, by saying that the United States is not without its own challenges, and we never pretend that we do not have our own challenges. But we seek to engage in constructive dialogue with the Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media and other participating states to address any concerns. We again praise the efforts of the Representative on Freedom of the Media and her team as they continue to offer unbiased, principled advice to OSCE participating states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Russian Federation, which will be followed by Austria.
Thank you, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The freedom of expression situation in the OSCE region is continuing to deteriorate. One cannot fail to be concerned by the fact that in the member states there is a fragmentation of information provision, which is in complete contradiction with the Helsinki Final Act, and we're particularly concerned by the fact that there is a growing tendency on the part of international institutes to undermine freedom of speech. In the process of last year's meeting, Russia expressed the opinion that there is a double standard in the OSCE, and this was met with very emotional reactions. And yet the Ukrainian crisis has shown that there is a dual approach by OSCE organs. The situation of journalists in Ukraine was assessed initially by the OSCE as individual episodes, but we have seen Ukraine going as far as it possibly can, and this is highly criticized normally by the OSCE, namely banning certain television films and serials. Serial events have been prohibited, and Russian language information simply is not made available. Now, it should be stressed that the ONG, International Institute for the Safety of Journalists, in its report of 2015 identified Ukraine as the most dangerous country in the world for journalists. And at the present time, there are really no efforts to investigate these crimes, and eyes are being closed to such crimes against journalists, not only in Kiev, but also in Europe and the United States. Apparently, direct connivance in violation of human rights is in someone's political interest. On 16 September of this year, there was a new decree by the President of Ukraine with a whole list of journalists who were subject to sanctions. Now, this resulted in such a wave of criticism that Kiev couldn't ignore that, but rather than changing the shameful decree, they simply deleted Western journalists from the list. And with that, the righteous anger of defenders of freedom of speech in the OSCE fell silent. And so that means, in fact, that Russian and Russian language journalists simply can't exercise their profession. This apparently is convenient for some. They get rid of the competition. And yet, at the same time, if we look at access to Russian media in the internet, there's a great interest in such access. Then we have political censorship in Lithuania in 2014. There have been a number of attempts to block broadcasting. RDR Planet, for instance, was banned from broadcasting in Lithuania for 3 months, and that was assessed by the European Commission that this would a good way of protecting information expansion from the outside. So Brussels has, in fact, given its blessing to this kind of action. Censorship against Russian media is occurring in a number of Western European countries. And in the Yukos case, for instance, there are certain legal decisions being taken against Tartas, which is certainly in full violation of the European Convention of Human Rights and the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. So in summarizing everything that I've stated, it's clear that you can always find a way of justifying violations of international law, but we cannot accept such an approach. We believe that all member states of this organization should fully meet their commitments. Thank you.
Now I'd give the floor to Austria, followed by Sweden.
Thank you, and I would just like to start by adding my voice to that of the EU and others to express our appreciation to Dunja Mijatovic for the great work she's doing, including highlighting emerging challenges and raising her voice for those who are silenced. Her activities coincide with a number of priorities in our own human rights work, safety of journalists, and here specifically let me mention the exposure of women journalists to online hate. Secondly, the protection of confidentiality of journalists' sources. The ongoing erosion of this confidentiality damages the vital public function of media as a public watchdog. And thirdly, overall, the freedom of expression vis-à-vis legitimate security concerns and the need to stick to the principles of necessity and proportionality. So we would like to add the following recommendations for participating states. Strengthen the implementation of existing commitments, review legislation and policies, prosecute perpetrators of hate speech and other attacks without differentiating between on and offline attacks, recognize the value of source protection and strengthen legal safeguards in this regard, ensure the freedom for dissent, and overall protect the safety of journalists to conduct their activities freely. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you very much for the concrete proposals and recommendations. I would now like to give the floor to Sweden, followed by Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dunja. Of course, Sweden aligns itself to the statement by the EU, which will be circulated later on in full, and which I recommend to be read. A full version of the Swedish national statement will also be circulated. There can be no security, neither for individual human beings nor for states, without the full respect for the fundamental right of freedom of expression. Human rights and fundamental freedoms are intrinsically interlinked with our common security, and that's why OSCE participating states have repeatedly reiterated that the implementation of our human dimension commitments is a matter of immediate and legitimate concern to all participating states, which we have made collectively clear that we're all accountable to our citizens and responsible to each other for the full implementation of these commitments. This is the very essence of the concept of comprehensive security and the unique added value of the OSCE. And that's why we must speak out when commitments are violated and be ready to address both our own shortcomings and those of others. The HDIM is a unique tool to do this, and we urge all participating states to engage in this process with frankness, openness, and in good faith. Regrettably, over the last year, we have seen how these rights and principles continue to be violated, and in some places increasingly so. That's why we are concerned about the shrinking space for public debate in the Russian Federation, the imprisonment of journalists in Azerbaijan and other states. Among other worrying trends is that freedom of expression is increasingly violated online. Of particular concern is the fact that female journalists are being specifically targeted. We need more female journalists online, not less. It's only through a free and pluralistic free media an exchange of information and the ideas that we can build democratic, prosperous, and peaceful societies. Freedom of expression is a vital precondition to unveil propaganda, uncover corruption, challenge stereotypes, and build public momentum for public change. Sadly, there is a growing misuse of security concerns as a pretext to clamp down on freedom of expression. The current crisis in and around Russia is a case in point, and we note with concern the link between external aggression and internal repression. Lies and disinformation are being fed to people with ever-shrinking access to alternative sources of information. We call on the Russian government to reverse this practice. There are a lot of things that the Swedish government is doing to address these issues in our own country, and which you can read in the full national statement. We express our strongest support for the mandate of the OSCE RFOM and commend the representative and her staff for their tireless efforts to advocate and promote the full compliances with the principles and commitments. Sweden fully supports the manner in which the mandate is executed, and we thank the representative and her team for her excellent work under increasingly challenging circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now pass the floor to Slovenia, followed by Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Slovenia fully subscribes to the statement by the European Union. Nonetheless, I would like to mention one issue which is of interest to my country. Let me start by saying that Slovenia highly values the work of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media and her team, especially their efforts to encourage all participating states to live up to their commitments. In this connection, I would like to recall the correspondence initiated by Mrs. Dunja Mijatović with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia on the issue of judicial proceedings that were started in the past 2 years against journalists in Slovenia because of disclosure of classified information. I would therefore like to inform the participants of this working session about recent new developments in my country regarding this issue. The National Assembly of the Republic of Slovenia passed on July 9th of this year a bill amending the Criminal Code, which provides for the defense of public interest in the cases of disclosure of classified information. The amended Article 260 of the Criminal Code introduces exclusion from criminal liability for the act of disclosing classified information in cases when such information, and I quote, reveals unlawful encroachment on human rights and fundamental freedoms, other constitutional or legal rights, serious abuse of authority or powers, or other serious irregularities in the exercise of power, public authority, or public service if the offense has not been committed for material gain, does not threaten human life, and has no serious or irreversible damaging effects on the security or legally protected interests of the Republic of Slovenia. End of quote. Furthermore, the exclusion from criminal liability for the disclosure of classified information applies if public interest in disclosing the information outweighs that of maintaining its secrecy, and if such an act poses no direct threat to the life of one or several persons. The Act amending the Criminal Code will enter into force on October the 20th. Let me also point out that the procedure of amending this legislation included extensive public consultation with civil society, in particular with journalist associations of Slovenia. There was therefore a broad political consensus in the Slovenian parliament for the proposed amendments. Mr. Moderator, I believe that the adopted legislative amendment speaks clearly of the commitment of my government to strengthening the standards of media freedom in Slovenia in accordance with international norms. I also believe that this move amply demonstrates our awareness of the fact that freedom of opinion and expression are fundamental rights and are as such essential for the fulfillment and enjoyment of a wide range of other human rights. Finally, let me assure you that my country looks forward to continued excellent cooperation with the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now I pass the floor to Norway, which will be followed by Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I will make 3 simple but very basic recommendations. Firstly, ensure a safe working environment for journalists and media workers. Attacks on and harassment of journalists represent a threat to democracy. Pay particular attention to female journalists who are often victims of harassment online. Secondly, respect the rights of journalists to protect their sources, also in a digital environment. Sources must be confident that they run no risk by helping journalists expose corruption or abuse of power. Finally, introduce legislation that ensures access to public documents. This will enhance transparency and accountability, cornerstones of any democracy. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to the delegation of Poland, followed by the Tajik Media Council.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Poland fully aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the European Union. In addition, let me make 3 remarks in my national capacity, focusing on safety of journalists. Firstly, we as participating states have a clear obligation to secure and protect safe environment for journalists carrying out their work for the benefit of our societies. Free and unimpeded access to information allows people to exercise the right to freedom of expression, allows them to make responsible and independent choices. As a matter of fact, such access empowers them as citizens. Journalists, those who collect and disseminate information to the public, have to be treated as an indispensable part of our societies. They should not be intimidated, threatened, or silenced. Journalists have to be protected in order to perform their profession in a safe and secure environment. In this regard, and this is a recommendation, we all have to fulfill media freedom-related commitments undertaken by our predecessors. We might also consider improving the current legislative framework concerning the protection of journalists. Given some misunderstanding in this field, it is worth reminding everybody that commitments undertaken in the field of human dimension do not belong exclusively to the internal affairs of the country concerned, as stated in the Astana Declaration. Secondly, we need to profit more from the expertise of the institution of the RFOM and ask for assistance in solving concrete problems. I would like to stress that Poland values very much the work done by Ms. Dunia Mijatovic. I want to thank for her diligence in addressing challenges arising in the field of freedom of the media in the OSCE participating states, including in my country. Therefore, remarks are often not pleasant for a given state, as we had today, but this is the nature, this is the mandate of the office to remind us about our obligations and commitments, and we need to respect it. Thirdly and lastly, Poland declares its intention and encourages other countries to work constructively and in open spirit with a view to adoption a decision on safety of journalists at the Ministerial Council in Belgrade. We have to show political will, which enables us to overcome a deadlock which we have been experiencing for some time. We should adopt an ambitious yet realistic approach in order to reach a sound decision on this issue in December. I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. I would now give the floor to the Tajik Media Council, followed by the Association of Internet Service Providers of Tajikistan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The situation with the freedom of expression, opinion, and freedom of the press in Tajikistan is extremely complex, especially given recent events in the country. In January of this year, we were worried about the influence of the economic crisis, but now we're worried about the general political situation, which is influencing freedom of the press and freedom of expression in Tajikistan. The September events in the country made the situation worse and only helped to promote the spread of government propaganda. To this, on the 30th of June, we note that the president of Tajikistan signed a decree according to which all government agencies must use official information. That is, official information can only be used in certain contexts. This is a serious limitation on access to information and on the freedom of the media. Unfortunately, the Tajik authorities do not recognize the independence of the media or journalists as the fourth estate. They see them as a kind of bane. The special protection is provided to state authorities from criticism, because criticism is considered to be an attack on those persons. So there is a continuing clampdown on freedom of the press in Tajikistan, and there are 5 cases that have been brought against independent media bodies in this year alone. In 2014, there were amendments to a state law which allowed the government to deprive mobile phone owners of access to information through their mobile phones. Given the situation that was declared by the government in September, there has been further limitation on access to information. We have a number of recommendations. We'd like to recommend that there be decriminalization of a number of elements in providing information in Tajikistan. We also would like to see equal treatment of all media and their free access to official information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'll give the floor to Association of Internet Service Providers of Tajikistan, followed by Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I fully endorse what my colleagues has just said. And my capacity as a chairperson of the Tajik Internet Service Providers and IT companies, I would like to emphasize another obligation of my country as a member of the OSCE. I'm talking about free access to the internet, or indeed about the blocking of access to the internet by the Tajik authorities. As we are meeting here, the practice of the indiscriminate and illegal blocking of the internet in Tajikistan continues. This practice, which takes place without any legal basis, is not only illegal, but also counterproductive. It does not only violate the human rights of the Tajik citizens, but also hurts the economic interests of the country. As a member of the World Trade Organization, Tajikistan has to establish an independent telecommunication regulator in order to implement the obligations of the country in the field of telecommunication services. Our incumbent regulator, however, continues to reject any responsibility for the blockings of websites, although the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights requires the government to ensure the freedoms guaranteed under this convention, which includes freedom of expression and free access to internet. I use the opportunity of this conference to appeal to the representatives of the government of Tajikistan present here in Warsaw to comply with the international obligations of our country and to allow citizens of Tajikistan free access to the internet and other sources of information like SMS and MMS services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the delegation of Canada, followed by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The representative on freedom of the media has rightly pointed out that the world, including the OSCE region, is witnessing increasing threats to freedom of expression, from the terrorist attacks in Paris at the beginning of this year to more insidious forms of violence and harassment faced by female journalists online. As their shape and scope varies, we must remain vigilant and seek calibrated responses to these threats with a view to safeguarding human rights and fundamental freedoms. As 46 OSCE participating states declared in a joint statement, which Canada had the honor to deliver at this year's Belgrade Conference on the Safety of Journalists, and I quote, "Societies around the world are strengthened and enriched by free speech. No one should face murder, violence, intimidation, or harassment for exercising his or her right to freedom of expression." End of quote. In this context, we are deeply concerned by the actions of some OSCE participating states that censor, persecute, or imprison activists, journalists, and bloggers who exercise their rights, be it online or offline. Of particular concern this year are situations in Azerbaijan and Russia. In a year during which she has herself received unwarranted criticisms and online attacks for doing precisely the job we have collectively entrusted her with, Canada reiterates its support to the OSCE representative on freedom of the media. We appreciate her engagement in addressing a broad range of issues, including the enjoyment of rights and freedom online, the use of freedom of expression to promote tolerance and understanding in our diverse societies, as well as addressing the serious challenges posed to journalists and free media in the context of the crisis in Ukraine. Our recommendations for this session will be circulated in writing, but basically, we recommend that the representative on freedom of the media keep up her good work, and we know she will. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, followed by the delegation of Ukraine.
I'm Joanna Levison on behalf of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, OSCE colleagues, and distinguished guests. I'd like to dedicate my remarks to Khadija Ismailova, an Azeri investigative reporter who's also a contributor to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Khadija is in prison on flagrantly political charges brought against her in retaliation for her reporting on corruption linked to senior Azeri officials. The last time I saw Khadija was here at this forum in this room when she stood up for several political prisoners who were jailed for exercising their rights of free speech and free assembly in Azerbaijan. On behalf of RFERL, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, I want to reiterate that the charges against Khadija have no basis in law. They are punishment for her reporting, and we call for her immediate release. I'd like to remind participants that Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Baku bureau was raided last December 2014, as a result of which we had to close the bureau in May. In addition, several of our employees had to flee the country in fear for their lives and the well-being of themselves and their families, and in many cases permanently. And those who have stayed fear imprisonment at any time. I know that Azeri authorities are targeting Maidan TV reporters as we speak, just as they targeted us. Azerbaijan is systematically destroying non-state media, flagrantly violating commitments it has made as an OSCE member state. I'd also like to use the opportunity of these remarks to highlight Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's situation in Turkmenistan. Our journalists there have always been subject to egregious abuses by Turkmen authorities. And in fact, Olga Sapar Muradova even died in a Turkmen prison cell in 2006. Over the last year, however, authorities have systematically targeted the correspondents who form our local network in what can only be understood as a campaign to shut us down. Sapar Murad Nepeskuliev is currently in prison, having been detained incommunicado in July, and 6 of our other 9 correspondents have been subject to pressure tactics designed to make them stop reporting. In several cases, their family members have been threatened with a loss of livelihood because a son or a daughter or brother is working for us. On behalf of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, I call for Mr. Nepesculiev's immediate release and condemn Turkmenistan's attempt to silence Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in violation of its OSCE commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to a delegation of Ukraine, followed by the International Association of Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, the main reason for my speech is cynical and brutal war Russia started in Ukraine in 2014 in Crimea and later in Donbas. Journalists and Ukrainian media have become a live target. The very first thing Russian troops did after seizing Ukrainian government institution and military bases in Crimea is to taking over local TV towers and cable operators and media offices. Russian military has cut off all Ukrainian TV channels in Crimea prior to conducting the illegal plebiscite organized as a pretext to the annexation of peninsula. The same activities were conducted on the occupied territories of Donbas. Russian media extensively use hate speech propaganda and disinformation in their programs. Thousands of internet bots work for the Kremlin. In the same time, violence against journalists became common on the occupied territories. In 2014, according to Independent Media Union of Ukraine, experts spotted in Donbas in Crimea 132 cases of beating journalists, 128 censorship acts, 115 not allowing them to work, 78 kidnappings, 70 cases of threat and intimidation, 59 attacks on mass media officers. In 2015, for 8 months, we recorded 22 cases of violation of journalists' rights in Donbas and Lugansk and 32 cases in Crimea. And now when I make this speech, one journalist, Maria Varfolomeeva from Free Reporters, still in captivity in LNR, and as you know, we have Nadia Savchenko and Oleg Sentsov and others in Russia. In general, during the occupation by pro-Russian terrorists were 8 journalists killed. So safety of journalists has become even more pressing issue since the level of violence against journalists, including murders, assault, and serious injuries, and the effect of intimidation has significantly increased over the years of Russian occupation. Reports of violation of journalists' rights and human rights, as well as reports of Russian army presence in Donbas, are available in the tables next to the room and from our delegation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the International Association of Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes, followed by the delegation of Lithuania.
Спасибо.
Thank you, distinguished participants and dear moderator. Azerbaijan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and aggressive Russia. There are many countries of dictatorship, but there is no real information there. The mass media in the Russian Federation have been turned into an instrument of spreading lies. In a dictatorship, everything is understandable. It's all based on lies. Now, what about the other side? Well, it would seem that in the countries of Western Europe, and especially the governments, should give good examples of spreading objective information. But that's not always the case. Let us take the example of Germany. The Belarus group of journalists received some information from the government of Germany that was not complete and verifiable. Now, the delegation of the government of Germany at such a meeting, when asked a question about cooperation between the German police and the militia of Belarus, that was all brought to an end in March of 2003. Now, What about the banditry of the militia of Belarus in December of 2010 at the time of voting? So the government of Germany was in fact distributing information that was not true, because it has been demonstrated that there has been cooperation between the police of Germany and the militia of Belarus right through to 2011. There have been 4 seminars held, 2 in Germany, 2 in Belarus. And for us, Democrats, protectors of human rights in those countries, we find that absolutely shocking. There have been trials that are completely falsified, that are Stalinist in style, and in parallel, the German police was holding training sessions for the thugs of this dictatorship. So this is a mechanism that really cannot be acceptable. I mean, this reminds us of the crematoria that were held, that were organized in Germany in a previous time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now pass the floor to the delegation of Lithuania, followed by the OSCE NGO network in Sweden.
Mr. Moderator, while fully aligning with the EU statement, I would like to make several remarks in my national capacity. Let me start by commending the extensive efforts and activities of Dunya Mijatovic and its office in being at the fire line in defending the core principles of human rights despite the continuous harsh public attacks from some participating states. Attacks on journalists are, like all attacks on civilians, attacks on humanity. They are also attacks on the international community's ability to understand and respond effectively to conflicts that threaten the international peace and security. Today, however, wars are fought not only by means of equipment and weaponry, but also through deliberate disinformation, propaganda, and media restrictions. As the warfare is becoming increasingly asymmetrical and targeted propaganda is becoming just another weapon of war, there is a clear need for more comprehensive measures to ensure the independence of the media. Here, we would like to join the reform who express her continuous concern about the increase in violence and harassment against journalists in Russia, including the targeting of journalists seeking to raise the truth surrounding Russian aggression against Ukraine, including Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. Propaganda fueled by the Russian government is fomenting and exacerbating tensions. We see how those who seek to challenge government narratives become targets of repression. Self-censorship has become the only option for many, while those courageous journalists who preserve the independence are witnessing the space for free public debate shrink. Using this opportunity, I would like to invite you all tomorrow morning to the side event on the Extinguishing the Flame of Propaganda with Media Freedom and Pluralism, which will serve as a platform for exchanging views on how to broaden and deepen the OSCE's involvement in combating propaganda, hate speech, and incitement to war while protecting media freedom, and will draw upon the existing efforts of their firm in this area. During its chairmanship of the UN Security Council, Lithuania has submitted a draft resolution on the protection of journalists in the conflict zones, which was adopted unanimously by the UN Security Council on 27th of May. For the first time, freedom of expression and the role of independent media are linked in the resolution in order to ensure the protection of journalists and civilians in armed conflict. The UN Security Council resolution also condemns the use of media in order to inflict violence or provide a pretext for aggression, thus violating international humanitarian law. This provision of the resolution means that the Security Council condemns the incitement to violence and launching any kind of propaganda war, which is very important in the face of Russian staged information war, which accompanies Russian aggression against Ukraine. The power of the media is essential for maintenance of international peace and security. It's our duty and responsibility to protect those who risk their lives in order to disclose and disseminate the truth. We hope that the debates started in this regard in Vilnius Ministerial could be finalized in Belgrade Ministerial through adoption of ministerial decision on safety of journalists. Therefore, you can count on Lithuania's full support in this process. I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Now the OSCE NGO network in Sweden, followed by the Legal Media Center.
Mr. Chairman, ambassadors and dear friends of civil society, I am speaking on the behalf of the Swedish OSCE network. Free media are a cornerstone of pluralistic society, but they are under pressure. Most urgent are the ambitions of many governments to restrict information and to control media. national security interests are allowed to prevail over fundamental principles of freedom as established in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the Charter of Paris. In the World Press Freedom Index of 2014, stable democracies as United Kingdom, France, and especially United States are dwindling. Witch hunt over whistleblowers has been more essential than to rein in abusive surveillance. Among EU countries, Hungary and Greece have fallen heavily, and they happen to sit side by side in this hall. In the rest of Europe, the situation is alarming. In Ukraine, even more so in Russia, especially Turkey, where the country where the highest number of journalists in the OSCE area are imprisoned. But today, Azerbaijan must be in focus. Several outstanding journalists have been brought to jail, most recently Kadia Ismailova, and also civil society activists as Rasul Jafarov, whose picture I wear on my shirt. I hope you see it. Safety of journalists has grown a paramount issue, not the least thanks to our strong representative of freedom on the media, Ms. Mijatovic. A very clear commitment was also made by the United Security Council in May this year. It adopted unanimously a resolution on safety of journalists. Now is the time for many states to take action. And don't forget the protection of sources of journalists. To sum up, in the OSCE, we need a strong new representative of media when Mrs. Mijatovic, unfortunately, will step down next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to the Legal Media Center, followed by Freedom House, Washington office.
Thank you for having given me the floor. I would like to draw your attention to a dangerous and unnormal trend dealing with courts in Kazakhstan recently. There is essentially a kind of a situation in which the local press is being beheaded. A journalist, Belinova, has been accused of theft. There's also the newspaper Adam, in which $200,000 in moral damages were being requested, despite the fact that there was a public apology on the part of the journalist for an error made. It is obvious that such excessive measures can lead to the closure of these news portals, and that is a violation of international guarantees on freedom of the press. Now, given the political situation in Kazakhstan, when we try to appeal for attention to these matters at the national level, there is no attention paid. This is why we have brought these cases to the attention of distinguished Dunya Mijatovic. We would like to appeal to you, Dunya Mijatovic, from the Journalist Society of Kazakhstan to ask you to appeal to the government of Kazakhstan to carry out an objective assessment and investigation of the situation of Galishkin, a journalist who for 20 years has been an investigative journalist and has been now for 6 months in detention and is being accused of embezzlement. There is a high-level, highly placed bureaucrat involved in this case. We need your attention to this case. It's very important to us that the investigation, which is being taken outside of judicial norms, be impartial and so that there be a fair trial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the Freedom House Washington office, followed by a delegation of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Freedom House is pleased to speak on the issue of propaganda and offer recommendations on how to address its harmful effects. Propaganda is a scourge that must be aggressively confronted by all present to ensure that it does not overpower objective reporting and information. It is not effectively used as a tool for political manipulation and aggression. In this struggle, we must also diligently protect human rights and democratic development by rejecting draconian restrictions that could result in a decline in pluralism and violations of essential tenets of freedom and democracy. Censorship has no place in a democratic society, and our response to propaganda should not rely on censorship or restrictions on media content or outlets. Any restrictions should be narrowly tailored to ensure that they only target information in outlets that truly threaten democracy and human rights, with actions such as incitement to war and violence. In most cases, existing laws and frameworks can adequately address these harmful effects. The response to propaganda should instead focus on building attractive and effective alternatives to encourage media pluralism, factual reporting, and public debate and discussion. To that end, Freedom House makes the following recommendations to participating states, as well as the OSCE, civil society, and the media. Reject draconian restrictions on individuals and outlets, except those absolutely necessary to address imminent threats of violence and war. Support programs to make citizens more informed media consumers, enabling them to identify and scrutinize propagandistic messages on their own. Support the training of independent and citizen journalists in investigative journalism and reporting. Facilitate the development of independent media, especially local and community-driven media, to ensure that developments are covered from diverse angles. Support and enable initiatives that seek to dispel myths and rumors as well as debunk propaganda. And support new initiatives to bolster demand among Russian speakers for impartial, accurate news, including investigations and creative and educational content, including satire. We welcome you at a further discussion of how to address propaganda at an event tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in meeting room 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the delegation of the United Kingdom, followed by the Czech Republic.
Thank you very much. We, of course, begin by aligning ourselves with the statement on behalf of the European Union, and I would like to add a few brief national remarks. I'd first like to add my voice to those paying tribute to the work of Dunya Mijatovic and her team. By creating the position of the representative nearly 20 years ago, participating states expressed a shared commitment to uphold freedom of expression as a fundamentally recognized human right and an essential pillar of democratic society. We entrusted the representative with a mandate to draw on their experience and judgment to perform their duties. Ms. Mijatovic does that precisely by applying her judgment in an impartial and professional manner. Mr. Moderator, as we have heard from many speakers, the principles of free expression and free media have had particular resonance this year. One reason is the public and political reaction to the Charlie Hebdo shootings in Paris, which demonstrated deep-rooted support for these freedoms and reinforced our common resolve to protect the safety of those exercising freedom of expression. The UK, therefore, wishes to commend Serbia for the attention it has given to freedom of expression and journalist safety during its OSCE chairmanship. Finally, looking forward to the Belgrade Ministerial Council. Neither UN resolutions nor OSCE ministerial decisions can prevent attacks against freedom of expression, but they can provide important affirmation of the value of protecting freedom of expression and promoting a zero-tolerance approach towards violence, harassment, and intimidation against exercising that right. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Moderator, there is no logical nor principled reason why participating states should be unable to agree language on this important issue at the OSCE when we have already done so at the United Nations. I therefore call on all participating states to reflect seriously and to come to the Belgrade Ministerial Council ready to show the resolve that this issue deserves and adopt a ministerial decision that will bring OSCE commitments into line with those already agreed in other international fora. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I'll now give the floor to the Czech Republic, followed by France.
Thank you, Moderator. The Czech Republic, of course, aligns herself with the statement of the European Union, in addition to which I would like to make some comments in my national capacity. We would like to first thank the representative on freedom of the media, Ms. Dunya Mijatovic, for her work and constant reporting on the situation of media freedom. We echo the concern expressed by her and our partners over the worsening situation with regard to freedom of expression and growing restrictions on civil society actors, journalists, and human rights defenders in the OSCE region. In particular, we are concerned about cases of persecution of independent journalists and activists by the Russian Federation and the recent row of seriously flawed trials resulting in sentencing of the foreign nationals Oleg Sentsov and Alexander Kolchenko. We are worried about laws on foreign NGOs and so-called undesirable organizations and increasing misuse of information and media for political purposes in the OSCE region. We follow with concern the situation of media freedom in the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula and the campaign against independent journalists and human rights defenders in Azerbaijan, the most recent cases being those of Leila and Arif Yunus and Khadia Ismailova. We call on the participating states to release the unfairly imprisoned, to fulfill the commitments made in the area of freedom of expression and the media, and to engage constructively with the representative on freedom of the media on issues of concern and her recommendations. For Czech Republic, the support of independent media has been a long-term priority, which was once again confirmed in the newly adopted Strategy for Human Rights and Democracy Promotion of the Czech MFA. Through the Transition Promotion Program, we annually dedicate approximately 400,000 euros to support media in Eastern Europe and will continue to do so. In partnership with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, we provide fellowships to talented journalists from Eastern Europe and Western Balkans through the Václav Havel and Jiří Dinsbier Journalism Fellowships. As a tangible expression of our support for the mandate and activities of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, we have provided voluntary funds to the Open Journalism Project and others. As one of the co-sponsors of the side event Extinguishing the Flame of Propaganda with Media Freedom and Pluralism, let me also, like Lithuania, use this opportunity and kindly invite you to join us tomorrow morning and discuss this important topic. In conclusion, the Czech Republic would like to call once again on all participating states to fully respect their commitments related to freedom of expression online and offline, and encourage them, with view to the upcoming Ministerial Council in Belgrade, to have a substantial discussion on freedom of expression in order to be able to adopt a decision on this matter aimed at further strengthening our commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll give the floor to France, followed by the International Public Fund, Russian Peace Foundation.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator, and thank you, Madam Representative for Freedom of the Media. We fully support what was said on behalf of the European Union. We have a few national points to make. Madam Representative for the Media and dear colleagues, a number of you this morning and this afternoon have referred to the attacks of 7 January last against Charlie Hebdo, as a result of which 2 terrorists used heavy weaponry to kill 12 people and wound 11 others. Thank you very much for those references. In our region and elsewhere in the world, violence against journalists is occurring not just in situations of armed conflict, but also in peaceful countries when there are investigative journalism against organized crime and corruption. Journalists should be free from any pressure. Confidentiality of sources must be fully respected. A number of delegations have also today referred to Resolution 2222 of the Security Council of the United Nations, which recognizes the fundamental role being played by journalists online and offline and how important it is to protect them in their work. Dear colleagues, Madam Representative for the Media, on this occasion I'd like to refer to the fact that we are a community of diplomats, of NGOs, and our interest in the OSCE, and this afternoon in particular for freedom of speech. It is our interest to work together in order that our community be able to act effectively and to make sure that all individuals in the OSCE area and the rest of the planet, in fact, have their freedom of speech guaranteed. How can we do this? We have a common responsibility. That is to combat impunity of perpetrators of violence against journalists. If there is one thing that we can do together together, it is to make sure that we work jointly to achieve that objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the International Public Fund Russian Peace Foundation, followed by the International Media Holding.
The Russian Peace Fund. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an article before me called Discrimination in the Ukrainian Way, How There Are Violations of the Rights of Crimean Tatars. In this article, there is an analysis given apparently by ODIHR and other international organizations over the past 20 years. And this condemns the Ukrainian authorities for racism and intolerance towards Crimean Tatars. This is not Russian propaganda. This was written by you, leaders of the OSCE. Read what you write. Specifically, the reference to a monitoring of Ukrainians' fulfillment of its commitments from 2003 to 2011. You will see horrible facts here, horrifying facts. Now, the political situation has changed, and you have begun with a clean page, distinguished delegates. The rights of Crimean Tatars were not catastrophic, but now everything seems to have gone bad. We question the priorities of the OSCE, and it is no coincidence that today in this room, not once have we heard a reference to the Minsk agreements. This is very surprising, given that we are on the eve of a meeting of the Normandy Four. Now, the situation in Europe is constantly changing, and so is the situation in Ukraine. There is a need for serious dialogue. This has been recognized. It is a tremendous shame that no representatives of the OSCE are taking the initiative to bring forward true communication. Perhaps the double standards that have been demonstrated by ODIHR in the past are only strengthening. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Just to note that this is a session on freedom of expression, freedom of the media. That's probably why there was a lack of discussion on Minsk agreements. But I'll give the floor now to the International Media Holding, followed by the delegation of Netherlands.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am a founder of International Media Holding, which brings together a number of information and analytic resources in Armenia. And the objective is to ensure pluralism of opinion and the spreading of democratic values in our media space in Armenia and also in Georgia. And we also work with a number of international media experts. We are setting up an agency that will have representatives in countries of the Eastern Partnership, in Western Europe, in the United States, and in the United Arab Emirates. We have analyzed internet publications in particular, and to our surprise, the map looks quite differently than we had thought. In a number of countries where traditionally there are very high indicators, very good indicators of democracy and freedom of speech, there is in fact a substantial control by political parties and business interests. And if we look at the countries of the Eastern Partnership, it's not that clear either. The media resources market in Ukraine is highly saturated. There is a bit of a deficit of trust in the official media sources. There are new approaches to the use of information resources. In the Republic of Belarus, there seems to be some positive trend when it comes to freedom of the media. And according to our international media experts, there is support from government sources for some of the resources. Now, in Armenia, there is quite a lot of legal guarantees provided to a journalist. They are not confronted with bureaucratic hurdles, and the structures of the government, of the executive, are not necessarily confronted with unresolved problems. Is there a technical break?
Did I interrupt you?
Okay. 10 seconds. Okay. В отличие
Insofar as the number of pro-government and independent sites are concerned, there seems to be a parity among the different sites. And unlike a number of European countries where the media gain profit, in those countries I've mentioned, they are subject to closure because they simply can't make money.
Thank you very much. I would now give the floor to the delegation of Netherlands, followed by Romania.
Thank you, moderator. Of course, the Netherlands fully subscribed to the statement made by the EU, and I also would like to express my appreciation for the work of Dunja Mijatovic and her office. Freedom of expression, offline and online, is a key priority to the Netherlands. As the importance of ICT in daily life grows, we must ensure that human rights, including the right to freedom of expression and the right to privacy, are protected online as they are offline. These rights are essential to media freedom and pluriformity, and foundational to democratic, innovative and progressive societies. They create a healthy environment for the exchange of opinions and counter the opportunities for spreading misinformation among citizens. Our modern societies face increasing challenges to freedom of expression and privacy. There is thus a need to further these rights through appropriate national legislation, strong safeguards and effective oversight, consistent with international human rights standards, such as a legal framework should enable journalists to contribute to public debate effectively and without fear. It should guarantee access to information, privacy and data protection, confidentiality and security of communications and source protection. Although we must remain vigilant about those who use the internet for incitement to violence, we must also ensure that such violations are countered within the framework of the rule of law and exercise vigilance to ensure that legislation and sanctions are not applied in a discriminatory or arbitrary fashion against journalists and other media actors. We must not allow ourselves to be governed by a climate of fear. Human rights and security online are complementary concepts. We must remember that a free, open and secure internet is a global resource which benefits us all and should therefore be managed in the public interest. We need to ensure that the various stakeholders, that is, government, private sector and NGOs, play an active role in the ongoing discussions about its governance, management and security. We must also ensure that those who do not yet have a voice in this debate are empowered to participate in these discussions. The Netherlands actively pursues inclusiveness of the multi-stakeholder community in debates about the various aspects of cyber. And as we did during the Global Conference on Cybersecurity, and as we continue to do within the Freedom Online Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now pass the floor to the delegation of Romania, followed by the Ukrainian Human Rights Commission.
Thank you, moderator. I also subscribe to the statement delivered on behalf of the European Union, in particular in thanking the RFOM, Ms. Dunja Mijatovic and her team for the work well done in the field of freedom of expression and freedom of the media. Indeed, I would like to reiterate our full support for the mandate of the RFOM, because for Romania, freedom of expression and freedom of media online and offline are necessary ingredients for an active, engaged and informed citizenry. As such, they constitute the essential foundation for democracy, rule of law, peace and stability. Like many other countries around this table, Romania is fully committed to implementing the OSCE commitments it subscribed to. Moreover, we believe that we should be ready to adopt even new commitments to respond to emerging challenges, among which safety of journalists. We hope that participating states will be able to agree on a decision on this matter in Belgrade, which does not fall beyond international standards. And we wish to see the OSCE commitment strengthened to reflect the commitments adopted at the UN and other fora in recent years. In the context of the discussion of today, I would like to announce that Romania will host on 7 and 8 October this year an expert workshop on media freedom and responsibilities in the context of counter-terrorist policies, which is organized together with RFOM and the OSCE Transnational Threats Department. I sincerely hope that the conclusions of this workshop will be fed into the preparations for the Ministerial Council in Belgrade. I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Now call on the Ukrainian Human Rights Commission to take the floor, followed by the Citizens' Labour Rights Protection League.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, probably everyone knows that today's Ukraine is the most problematic European country in the terms of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and rights of journalists. According to information of the Ukrainian Institute of Mass Media, since the beginning of 2015 in Ukraine have been recorded 224 violations of rights of journalists. According to the Institute's report, almost every day journalists in Ukraine are beaten or intimidated. The worst sin in the continuation is the continuation of journalist murders. For example, this year, the talented famous journalist Les Buzina was killed right near the entrance of his house. Also in Kiev, this year were killed journalists Sergei Sukhobok and Margarita Valenko, in Cherkasy region Vasily Sergienko. In Ukraine, political pressure on opposition media, harassment, illegal criminal searches and arrests of journalists became the reality. There are varied forms of fight against the dissent in the Ukrainian media. State officials are trying to illegally shoot the license of popular opposition TV channel 112 and close metropolitan newspaper Vesti. There were a great number of provocations, criminal searches, etc. Ukrainian authorities are forcibly trying to substitute owners of this mass media. Ukrainian authorities always have standard charges on separatism with the following arrests of those media professionals who disagree with the state policy. The chief editor of the internet newspaper Za Pravdu, Artem Buzila, for the last 5 months has been imprisoned in Odessa on such fabricated accusations. The editor of the newspaper Рабочий класс Alexander Bodarchuk has been illegally jailed for the last 6 months in the Kiev prison. And I can continue this list. There are dozens of journalists who are jailed or who are in the wanted list of the Secret Service of Ukraine, as called SBU, for their opposition publications. Also, I want to draw your attention to the problem with the freedom of expression and regulation of the rights of conscientious objectors in Ukraine, so-named COs. This is the individuals who have claimed their rights to refuse to take military service, who have special ideological and moral convictions. This is a normal practice for European countries to protect our rights constitutions, but not for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now give the floor to the Citizens' Labour Rights Protection League, followed by the Alliance of Youth Initiatives of Kazakhstan Almaty office.
Thank you very much for the objective criticism of participating states. But today we have heard some very prejudiced statements. So it's been more than a month that almost all European institutions talk about Rasim Iliyev. He apparently criticized the president. Who needs this lie? I'm asking Ms. Dunya Mietovic. What happened is that this young man was a fan of one of the local teams, and he offensively criticized the captain of the team. And then he was killed and died 3 days later from his wounds. 6 people were immediately arrested, including a famous football player, and he was given 3 months detention, and we expect a 9 to 10-year sentence. So certainly we're not talking about freedom of expression here, but all institutions continue their criticism. So you will understand that governments will not listen to you, all the more so because Ms. Mijatovic at an international conference against corruption called the government of Azerbaijan a criminal regime. This goes far beyond her mandate. You simply won't be listened to if you speak in this way. Now, there are 6,000 or 7,000 people, members of different radical religious groups, who have a journalist ID documents in their pockets. What will happen? Well, naturally, they will be protected by your office. I think you need to investigate further for proceeding in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to the Alliance of Youth Initiative of Kazakhstan, Almaty office, followed by a delegation of Germany.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the floor. I'm speaking here at the request of an information portal, Respublika. Many of you here today know Respublika. For more than 10 years, the Kazakh authorities have been battling this newspaper, closing it at the end of 2012 for alleged extremism. Now, the fight continues with the internet portal, which de jure is located outside the borders of Kazakhstan. Now, despite the fact that access to Respublika in the territory of Kazakhstan has been blocked since 2010, the Kazakh authorities continue their attempts to destroy the portal. Recently, in order to achieve this goal, American lawyers were hired who are being used as a tool in order to destroy the portal in American courts. Journalists of Respublika would like to draw the attention of the U.S. and the EU delegations to this issue because we are certain that Kazakh authorities, with the aid of highly paid law firms and lobbyists, are creating a very dangerous precedent with respect to freedom of expression in the U.S. and in the EU. Now, here's what's going on. In March of this year, Kazakhstan brought a suit in a New York State district court against unknown persons for breaking into government computers and stealing thousands of messages sent from Gmail addresses. The courts involved issued a preliminary court order forbidding that these unnamed persons disseminate, use, or read these materials. Respublika, as many other news organizations around the world, had noticed that these electronic emails were freely accessible and that they referred to abuse by Kazakh government representatives of their duties and to corruption by these representatives and legal violations, including of international law. So naturally, the journalists wrote many articles about this correspondence. Specifically, in one of the articles, there was mention of the purchase in France and export without customs payments of a work of art by the Kazakh Prime Minister, Karim Masimov. In other articles, there was mention of how Kazakhstan is persecuting the opposition abroad with help from Ukraine and Russia. And once again, I repeat, I am referring to gigabytes of information and thousands of email. But the court order does not affect press, that is, does not affect Respublika, but it is referred to the unnamed persons who seized these computers. However, Kazakhstan, through its lawyers in the United States, began to pressure the host company of the portal to close it, and it also demanded the censure of the article and to close the portal down. Kazakhstan has also appealed to Facebook and to the Today main registrar with a demand to provide personal information about the authors and readers of the Respublika articles. Attention, not only the journalists, but also information about the readers. So Respublika, through its representatives, has been forced to appeal to the federal court in New York to request clarification about how it is possible that Kazakh bureaucrats are able to use U.S. courts in order to fight against independent media and internet resources, and to demand that they cut out articles criticizing the Kazakh government. Now, some of the persons who are involved in this case have also been paid by lobbyists. The representatives of the Electronic Frontier Foundation are representing the interests of the site in a case that has been brought. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I would now give the floor to the delegation of Germany, followed by Serbia.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Moderator.
Thank you, moderator. The European Union, the representative of the European Union, has of course spoken in our name, but I would like to put the stress on two further points. We strongly support the work done by the representative for the freedom of the media. And secondly, I would like to state that what was said by Mr. Erla, namely that next year Germany, when it takes over the chairpersonship of the OSCE, it will put a lot of stress on freedom of the media. After the war in my country, free media were really a driver of development and democratization, and they contributed greatly to stable development of my country. On a number of occasions, national and international organizations and institutions have contributed to strengthening our constitution and our laws to protect the media. And therefore, for us, it goes without saying that this must be done elsewhere. You have done very good work, and Mr. Steinmeier has underscored this by making sure that certain legal proceedings against journalists are well-founded. It's very important to have strong institutions. We support the mandate of the representative on the freedom of the media. This really is important work, and we would also welcome the impartiality of the work that you do, Madam Mijatovic. We certainly support your position, and next year in 2016, Germany will be putting a lot of stress on the freedom of the media when it takes over the chairpersonship and office of the OSCE.
I'd like to give the floor to Serbia, followed by Switzerland.
Good afternoon. Serbian chairmanship to OSCE coincides with the implementation of the new media legislation. In Serbia, 3 media laws has been adopted after 11 years, and after 1 year we can conclude several practical results. We have final withdrawal of the state from the ownership structure of the media, and this process is just going on. Privatization will be finished until 31st of October this year. Also, this was the year where we have been introducing project co-financing of the projects which are promoting public interest, which is defined by the law on public information and media. And what is even more important than that, during this year, the Ministry of Culture and Media and Serbian government for the first time became the biggest donor for project financing in Serbia. More important than this is that this money has been allocated by the Commission, where majority are made by the representatives of the Journalistic and Media Association, together with the representative of independent institutions and other important self-regulatory bodies like Press Council, and also Commission for the investigation of the murder of journalists, head by Mr. Veran Matic. We are practically showing by this decision and this involvement how important we think that this work of this government commission, and we really appreciate their result. Also, during this year, Ministry of Culture and Media organized the meeting for media, which websites suffered hacker attacks, and for other representatives as well. And with the representatives from the Public Prosecutor Office and Cybercrime Protection Office, the practical result is that we did not have hacker attacks on this media in previous period. And I will conclude by saying that for us was very important Belgrade conference that has been mentioned several times. This conference will be impossible without extremely good cooperation with the Office of the Representative on the Freedom of the Media. And I would like to use this opportunity to congratulate to Mr. Frane Marovic becoming director of the office, because we think that we will improve our relation in the future period and have an even more constructive dialogue. And I do hope that we will have the prompt answers on any of your questions, because our interest is to have as much as constructive dialogue with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to pass the floor to the delegation of Switzerland, followed by the Human Rights Information Center.
Merci, Monsieur le...
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Switzerland would like to formulate the two following recommendations concerning freedom of the media and protection of journalists. First of all, we recommend to all participating states that they work more assiduously to protect journalists and media workers by recognizing their fundamental role as pillars of our democracies. It is equally primordial that we recognize the impact of their work on the exercise of our rights, and specifically our right to the freedom of expression. Secondly, we recommend that all participating states associate themselves in a constructive manner with the initiative taken by the Serbian presidency chairmanship to present to the Ministerial Council in Belgrade a draft decision aimed at strengthening the protection of journalists. Mr. Moderator, Switzerland thanks the representative, Dunja Mijatovic, for her commitment, her comments which are engaged, courageous, and realistic. We pay tribute to her untiring work in favor of freedom of the media, as well as protection of journalists and of media workers. We support her efforts to promote the protection of journalists both on and offline, and we are happy to note that she's decided to target her activities more specifically on protecting the work of women journalists. We are convinced that the right to the freedom of expression and the freedom of the media, which follows directly from it, are inalienable principles of every democracy. Journalists, bloggers, and other media workers perform essential tasks which contribute to protecting and exercising the right to freedom of expression, and more generally to promoting and defending human rights. It is thus the duty of each state to ensure that these men and women may work under optimal security conditions. In order to do so, we must first have a solid legal framework, but we observe with concern that in some participating states there is a trend of weakening the legal foundations that should protect freedom of the media as well as of journalists. This trend is often the result of measures that are taken under cover of national security. Now, far from strengthening national security of a state, obstacles to the work of journalists only weaken the solid and effective links that should exist between a state and its people. A people which is free to independently inform itself and to criticize its rulers. Switzerland strongly condemns the aggressions that were perpetrated last year in the OSCE area and outside of it against journalists and media workers and all other individuals who are exercising their right to the freedom of expression. Repression against journalists does not only violate the rights of these journalists, it violates everyone's right to access free information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Just to note that we have also quite a few delegations that have asked for a right to reply, and I would like to announce that the right to reply will be limited to 1 minute. So those of you who are preparing the right to reply, you can prepare in advance because we still have quite a few speakers that would like to take the floor at this session. So thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to the Human Rights Information Center, which will be followed by the Holy See.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to draw your attention to the restriction and limitation of freedom of media in Crimea and pressure on independent journalists after Russia's occupation and annexation of Crimean Peninsula. It was done in part through the implementation of the law on countering extremist activity, criminal liability for incitement to separatism, reduction of a number of alternative sources of information, refusal in registration, harassment of journalists by law enforcement agencies, and the so-called Crimean self-defense. As a result, the majority of independent journalists either left the territory of Crimea or ceased to openly criticize the policy of the Russian Federation. Journalists who stayed in Crimea also faced the unreasonably difficult procedure of accreditation and a refusal in access to public information from so-called prosecutor office in Crimea and other de facto local authorities. Around 30 websites were blocked on the territory of Crimea. On the other side, international journalists lost possibility to work in Crimea due to the unreasonable restriction imposed by Ukrainian government. On June, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine adopted the resolution number 367 regulating the entry to and exit from the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine. This procedure creates significant obstacles to the work of international journalists in Crimea. Due to Ukrainian legislation for foreign citizens, it is legal to enter Crimea only from the territory of mainland Ukraine. The new regulation number 367 includes the list of grounds on which the foreigners can get a special permit to enter Crimea, and this list does not include journalistic activities. Crimea Field Mission on Human Rights in June fixed the refusal to enter Crimea to the group of Azerbaijan journalists. Also, our organization received a request from Belarus journalists willing to enter Crimea and having no possibilities to do it facing the new governmental regulation. Therefore, we call upon Russian Federation and de facto Crimean authorities to stop the pressure on independent journalists in Crimea, to hold politically motivated criminal investigation and warning for journalistic expression, to allow media pluralism, including Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar media, to cease online censorship through the blocking of websites, including on vague ground of extremist content. We also call Ukrainian authorities to allow access of international journalists to Crimea in order not to let the peninsula become an informational ghetto. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to the Holy See, followed by the Turkmen community in Norway.
Mr. Moderator, freedom of expression doubtlessly numbers among the pillars on which all free and democratic societies must stand. My delegation accordingly reiterates its support for freedom of expression online and offline, as well as the free exchange of ideas, including particularly those related to religious belief and associated moral teachings. we also express support to those who engage in ensuring that this freedom is everywhere practiced, respected, and defended. At the same time, freedom of expression, like other freedoms, has its limits and is not absolute. There are undisputable examples such as libel and insult, messages that seek to foster hatred and conflict among individuals and groups, mockery, obscenity, pornography, and others, which are certainly abuses of freedom. Even where one is able to do or say something, the purpose of freedoms cannot be to harm others, and such acts should not be justified only because someone feels it is his or her right to do so. Hence, the exercise of freedom of expression should not disregard such things as truth, fairness, and respect for privacy, nor undermine the dignity of persons and the common good. In fact, these should be the guidelines for all freedoms. Empowering the media by all means to foster an accurate reporting of events, full explanation of matters of public concern, fair representation of diverse points of view liberates the media industry from distortions and manipulative tendencies which emerge when it becomes solely profit-driven and self-serving. Beyond being merely informative in society, media outlets are also formative and bear responsibility towards the common good, truth, goodness, and beauty, as well as are called to be vigilant in maintaining a high level of ethics in communication. Finally, it goes almost without saying that the Holy See deplores abuses of this freedom involving the public mocking of religions, their founders or leaders, communities or individuals, which is often seen and defended as free expression. The regular humiliation of believers, in particular when it comes to what is most sacred to them, cannot be justified simply by the freedom of others to express themselves, and we condemn it for what it is, deliberate mockery, provocation, and denigration, acts before which we cannot remain silent. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. I would now like the Turkmen community in Norway to take the floor, followed by the Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan. No, Turkmen community of Norway, no. Then Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan, followed by IPI, Turkish National Committee.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be brief in my statement because time is limited, and I will submit a written statement. Now, as a post-Soviet country, we have differences amongst one another, and that affects media as well. At the present time, we have a number of journalists who have been imprisoned on the basis of criminal proceedings related directly to their professional work. Akhmanov, for instance, has been in jail since 2009. Another journalist, Mehman Azerbaijan, has been sentenced to 13 years, another one to 15 years. And Merasharayev, who was a parliamentarian in our country, has been in jail for many years as well. Now, I think that we need to take a resolution to have these individuals released as quickly as possible. But now they have found a different way of intimidating, not necessarily imprisoning. They use various trumped-up civil and criminal proceedings. For instance, slander of the head of state or what you have or what have you. And representatives of the United States and of Western Europe have stopped paying attention to the actions of the government and the way that they are treating representatives of civil society and human rights defenders. And this is something that we see on a daily basis, and in particular the NGO of which I am the leader. For instance, in the last few years, I'm no longer being invited to seminars, training courses, and our organization is finding itself in dire financial straits because of the new situation. And I would particularly appeal for a resolution to be adopted to free political prisoners. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now I would give the floor to the Turkmen community in Norway, then it will be followed by the IPI Turkish National Committee.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. I'm a former member of the Turkmen parliament. I now live in Norway, and unfortunately, I find that our dictator, Berdimuhammedov, who used to be my student, in fact, has become a usurper. The media in Turkmenistan is just engaging in gloating, dithyrambic praise of the Berdimuhammedov regime and its so-called era of Renaissance and its personality cult. There are no independent media in the country, but we have a very powerful propaganda machine run by the authoritarian regime, which is resulting in the population, and especially young people, being turned into zombies. Now, unfortunately, this regime is actually being helped by a number of democratic countries. For example, the President of the United States and his wife agree to be photographed together with the usurper Berdimuhammedov. In May of this year, Berdimuhammedov was officially invited to Austria and Slovenia, and the leaders of those countries did not allow journalists to put questions about problems of human rights in Turkmenistan to their dear guest. And they were not allowed to ask for any information about whether political prisoners are alive, those who were charged for the so-called November events. So is that freedom of media in Europe? Given this information vacuum, the only source of alternative information for Turkmenis is Radio Free Europe. However, how can you talk about media freedom? It doesn't really exist. I remember a time when people in the past would impatiently wait for radio broadcasts. And at the time, the anti-national policies of the regime were quite rightly criticized. There were very good transmissions talking about basic rights, but now Radio Azatlik is just copying what is said by the official channels in Turkmenistan, and despite the fact that the regime regularly violates the rights of the local population. You're not even allowed now to mention the name of the dictator Berdimuhammedov. And yet for 8 years now, there has been more and more limitation of freedom of speech. Now, the Turkmeni dictator has no doubt felt that the work of the radio is in his favor. Well, if you're not interested, thank you.
Sorry, we need to all have time to speak and to give everybody the chance. Just to let you know that the speakers list is now closed, and I would now like to give the floor to the IPI Turkish National Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Honorable representatives and participants, I am here with the purpose of getting your attention to the rapidly worsening oppression against journalists and the aggravating suppression of media freedom in Turkey in between June 7 elections and November the 1st snap elections. Multiplying practices to silence and intimidate the independent media and critical journalists have become an obvious tactic of the political power to win November the 1st elections. Attacks against journalists and journalism have surged to unprecedented alarming dimensions, particularly since the beginning of September. Mainstream media is at the top of the target list. Authorities attempt to justify their attacks by abusing anti-defamation and anti-terrorism laws. During these last weeks, Hürriyet Daily has been raided twice in 2 days interval by mobs close to power. In the first raid, the mob were led by an AKP parliamentary member. Prosecutors have launched a terrorism propaganda investigation into the Doğan Media Group, owner of Hürriyet. Police raided and searched the offices of Bugün Daily and Bugün TV belonging to Koza İpek Group, close to Gülen movement, for allegedly financing terrorism. Police also raided Nokta Weekly magazine and confiscated freshly printed copies of the new issue before its distribution for allegedly insulting President Erdogan on its cover picture. Access to several Kurdish websites and news websites critical of government was blocked. Several foreign media members were arrested in the southeast and then deported. Covering the southeast, currently the theater of a new conflict between the government forces and the PKK, is dramatically restricted. Media bosses vulnerable to government for many reasons have fired many critical journalists, including me. I've been fired from Milliyet last July for a tweet critical of Erdogan's Syria policy. Intimidation and harassment of critical journalists have reached new heights. Now, a columnist of one of the pro-AKP dailies repeatedly threatens journalists with death and can get away with it with impunity. The number of journalists against whom cases are filed for insulting President Erdogan is growing on almost daily basis. Ladies and gentlemen, authorities are criminalizing journalism in Turkey. Journalism is agonizing under unbearable pressure. My profession is one of the victims of politically engineered polarization. One thing is almost certain. If the repression is not stopped, journalism will not survive in Turkey. Freedom of expression and pluralism will also be lost altogether with journalism. Without a free press, it's hard to call Turkey a democracy, because without a free press, elections can't be fair. Without fair elections, Turkey's regime can't fit into the narrow definition of democracy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I would now like to pass the floor to the delegation of Armenia, followed by the Helsinki Citizens Assembly, Banadzor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to start by thanking Ms. Dunja Mijatović, OSCE representative on freedom of the media, for her important contribution and guidance in framing these discussions. Freedom of expression is not merely one of the fundamental freedoms. It's an inalienable right, and the level of its protection is the best indicator of overall situation on human rights. If we are nowadays to speak on existence of any standard of civilization that states should comply in order to be an equal member of international community, the freedom of expression will come the first. Armenia's progress in protecting freedom of expression is well recognized by the national and international stakeholders. Armenia has decriminalized the libel and subsequently addressed the issue of regulating the financial fees, which eventually led to the significant drop of overall cases. The effective address of crimes perpetrated against freedom of expression should remain high on the OSCE agenda. The Armenian delegation raised on a number of occasions, including at the level of Permanent Council, the urgent need to combat impunity against those who try to silence voices of journalists and community leaders through the most brutal and violent means. We appreciate the role of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media in keeping up with eminent cases and her determination to pursue the right to the truth for the victims. The violations of freedom of expression and the freedom of media have different dimensions. The overt propaganda of war and advocacy of hatred launched by public figures are usually part of the overall policy of limiting free public space of expression for journalists. Unfortunately, there are consistent efforts to silence voices of peace, reconciliation, and finally democracy in the OSCE region. The stigmatization and persecution of journalists and civil society members who are involved in the confidence-building measures under the charges of espionage activities are sad reality of the OSCE area. Finally, we would like to submit relevant recommendations to the participating states. First, to refrain from persecuting journalists and civil society representatives involved in the confidence-building measures in the conflict-related environment. Second, ensure the ability of independent media to investigate issues of public interest, such as corruption, and to publish the results of that investigation without fear of persecution and physical harm. And finally, we would like also to recommend to the OSCE representative on the freedom of media to promote regional cooperation and confidence building between free media. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the recommendations. Now I would like to call on the Helsinki Citizens Assembly Vaznadzor, followed by the Civil Activity Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished friends, I'm Artur Sakuns from the Helsinki office of the Citizen Assembly of Armenia. The president recently gave a medal to one of the deputies who owns a newspaper that propagandizes hatred towards members of the LGBT community. This is one example of incitement to hatred and hateful behaviors towards minorities in society. In this past year, there were 20 cases in Armenia of the violations of the rights of journalists, including journalists being beaten up. And also cases in which their cameras and other working instruments were ruined. On the 23rd of June, during the breaking up of a demonstration in Yerevan. So in this year, the violations of rights of journalists have been greater than the very difficult period in March of 2008. Now, those who have violated journalists' rights are not just simple policemen. They are people in leadership positions in Armenia who give orders for the killing of journalists. And they ask for their cameras to be seized because there we see violations of the rights of demonstrators on film. I call upon those here to ensure that there is a rapid investigation of these cases in Armenia and to bring to justice the highly placed authorities involved, as well as to judge for yourself the situation of the rights of journalists and to express your opinion of the inadmissibility of the propaganda taking place against human rights defenders, journalists, and other groups of the population. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the Civil Activity Fund, followed by the Media Law Institute.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I represent the Civil Activity Fund in Kazakhstan. My name is Aktibayev. In hearing out the previous speakers, it's easy to come to the conclusion that in the post-Soviet area there is more and more restriction on the freedom of the media and freedom of speech inter alia through the liquidation and intimidation of independent media. Now, in Kazakhstan, this process was in fact completed 2 years ago. Now, unfortunately, we did not receive the support of the OSCE or the office of Madame Mijatovic as our media were being done away with. Now, these media no longer exist. It's pointless to talk about them. But the point is that a new process now is underway. Galishkin, the journalist Galishkin, has been referred to. There's been reference to the media that were insured for high sums, but in Kazakhstan, the process undergoing now is that individual bureaucrats are beginning to deal with the media as they see fit. I mean, this is no longer coming from the political powers. I mean, the reasons for this are quite evident. Civil society has become too weak to protect the free media. But this is a new challenge, and I draw your attention to that. How can you protect those who are not being protected? Zonakaze, Ratarkaze, two internet sites that are no longer in action, and they need protection. There is a very large block now of media that are being repressed, that are being intimidated, that you won't even hear about. And I draw your attention to that. It's a new challenge. I mean, what happens in our country 2 or 3 years later happens in other countries of the CIS. Experience shows that.
Thank you very much. I will now call on the Media Law Institute, followed by Russia Today.
Dear delegates, fellow professionals, I'm representing the Media Law Institute, Ukraine. It's a civil society organization which is reform-oriented. Ukraine's media environment is changing. Its rules of game are changing, as do the media actors. We are handling our home assignment. 2 years ago, here in this room, we intervened on the lack of transparency in media ownership. And today, we are pleased to report on the achievements in this area. On the 3rd of September, the Ukrainian parliament adopted a relevant law that shall curb corruption in media sphere and ultimately unloose a tight oligarchy grip on media outlets. It obliges TV and radio broadcasters, program service providers, to disclose information on their final beneficiaries, all shareholders of over 10%. Data on the ownership structure to be published on the websites of broadcasters, to be provided when obtaining their licenses, and any relevant change should be reported to the national regulator. Another major change is that public authorities, local self-governance bodies, and entities registered in offshore zones are no longer entitled to set up broadcasting and service providers organizations. In parallel, the organization of all state-owned broadcasters into the public service broadcaster of Ukraine started. It is expected to abide by the professional journalist standards, prove independence from any external interference. And here, in October, the Conference of Civil Society Organizations shall be convened to elect members of the Supervisory Board for the public service broadcaster. Another awaited breakthrough was made in April 2015, when the notion of open data was introduced into Ukraine's legislation. Open data is nowadays published on a single web portal and is allowed for further reuse and dissemination. Use of public funds can now be tracked online since 15 of September. Parliamentary sittings are made available to Ukrainian citizens last December, thanks to the Media Law Institute strategic litigation. And here we should refer to the crucial role of the civil society organizations, a large coalition of the renovation package of reforms, which brings together a lot of civil society reform-oriented organizations. Along with this, the Ukrainian media environment is wrestling with a cascade of challenges, which is, when media cover elections, we say oligarchs monopolized microphones, as the candidates advertising on TV and radio remains unrestricted. Many media publish unmarked prepaid materials called jeans. Print media in Ukraine remain owned by the state or local
bodies. I have to ask you to wrap up because we are quite short on time.
The pace in digital switchover is quite low and slow. So we would urge the distinguished delegates, the representatives of international delegations, to join the civil society of Ukraine efforts in implementing the already adopted reforms and also in advocating before our government the long-awaited changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Russia Today, followed by Set My People Free.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Oksana Boyko. I'm a reporter and talk show host for RT, Russia Today, state-owned Russian channel that is often charitably accused by our counterparts, American journalists, as being the bullhorn of Russian propaganda. Now, I've been with RT for almost 10 years, and in this period I covered a number of wars in Libya, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in South Ossetia, hostilities in Kyrgyzstan, and lately in Ukraine. And I want to share with you that I covered that from the ground, not from a studio, as is a custom in international broadcasting these days. And I strongly share Ms. Miyatkovich's concern about the spread of hostile propaganda, but I must disagree on the thesis that somehow state-owned media are more responsible for that than other media. And I want to tell you a very short story to support my thesis. Back in April 2011, a number of Western channels started reporting on Viagra, sexually enhancing drugs that were distributed among Gaddafi troops by supposedly Gaddafi government to enable mass rape of Libyan women. Many channels carried that story, particularly Western channels. Then the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Mr. Ocampo, reiterated that story publicly, and shortly thereafter, the UN Security Council passed a resolution authorizing a no-fly zone over Libya. It was only a couple of months later that a number of international human rights organizations went back and checked and found out that it was a total fake that was concocted and distributed by the rebels, but obviously it was already too late. Now, I don't know if you would count that as an example of spreading hateful propaganda, but it certainly contributed to the crisis. And I think that also shows that journalists, regardless of their national affiliation or regardless of the form of ownership of their media, could become a tool of manipulation and propaganda. And I don't know how to deal with that, but I think what would certainly be helpful is to come up with a definition of propaganda that would not be tied to a form of ownership or indeed national media, because suggesting that somehow RT as a Russian state-owned channel is more prone to spreading propaganda than, let's say, CNN, privately owned, I think is not only offensive, I think it's highly propagandistic. We all report the same stories. We do that certainly from different points of view, from different vantage points. But using the label of propaganda to delegitimize the account that you disagree with is not only not helpful, as I demonstrated with my Libyan example, it leads to war and violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now give the floor to Set My People Free, followed by the Public Fund for Support and Development of Independent Print Media and News Agencies in Uzbekistan.
Kamal Fahmi, founder of Set My People Free, which is working to abolish apostasy and blasphemy laws in Islam. I have been encouraged by the session today, and I'm very thankful for the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, representative for freedom of media. And I think her report was encouraging to me, and also your support for freedom of speech. I think we all agree that freedom of speech is very key. And without it, we cannot really live in peace in this world. And I think from all the comments I heard, there is complete agreement. This is the basic of democracy. The problem is we need to walk the talk. I just don't want to hear it here. I want it to make a difference for the people in the ground, because people are suffering because lack of freedom of speech. Because freedom of speech, as we all agree, brings accountability. There is no danger to hear my opinion. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18 and 19 are very clear about freedom of conscience, thought, and belief, and also about the freedom of having an opinion. So the problem is, how are we going to implement this? Are we going to take it seriously? To speak this into the Human Rights Council in Geneva and in the UN, where we have Iran and Saudi Arabia represented? Do we really believe in freedom of speech? Are we going to take it seriously and get rid, like we got rid of apartheid and slave trade? You know, freedom is key. And you have a responsibility because you are representing your country. You have to work this in your country because people are suffering because of oppression and lack of justice. So we need to walk the talk. And as Martin Luther said, if there is injustice anywhere, it spreads justice everywhere. And it will spread you here. These are your values. This is what made Europe Europe. And you need to stand firm and to see it applied, to teach it to your children, and then the change will happen. But if we don't walk the talk, there will be no change. We will just talk here. And Dag Hammarskjöld said, he said, for the sake of peace and quiet, don't deny your conviction.
Thank you very much. Now, give the floor to Public Fund for Support and Development of Independent Print Media and News Agencies in Uzbekistan, followed by the delegation of Azerbaijan, and then last on my list after that is the delegation of Iceland.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I would agree with has been said by the situation of the media. When you look at the situation in Uzbekistan, you need to look at a whole process and the way that it's developing. Uzbekistan is introducing a number of effective measures to improve the way information is provided on the basis of the principle that a democratic society must be based on freedom of speech and access to information. Over the last few years, more than 10 laws have been enacted governing the way media operate and guaranteeing freedom of information, ensuring professionalism of the actions of journalism, about environmental control, social partnership, and transparency of actions by government. Now, a new draft law on ensuring freedom of speech is now being assessed by international experts, including some from the OSCE. Thank you very much to Madam Mijatovic and other representatives of the OSCE for their support in this effort. We have, therefore, a legal basis that ensures the development of independent media that can act freely. Today, we have more than 1,400 various types of media outlets. 53% of all television channels are not in government control. We have similar figures for the print press and for radio broadcasters. There were some 500 websites available in Uzbekistan, but now there's more than 25,000. The number of users is growing every year. There are more than 10 million people who have access to the internet, a very significant proportion of the population. Apart from that, the independent media are provided with a lot of support. The government budget has paid out more than 11 billion sum, our currency, to support independent media. Now I'm coming to an end. By the end of this year, a number of legal texts will be adopted that will ensure even better conditions for the work of the media. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to the delegation of Azerbaijan, just like to note that the interpreters have kindly agreed to stay for an extra 10 minutes so that we can go through the right of reply. So I would very much appreciate and thank you for keeping your comments and rights of reply short. Thank you very much. Delegation of Azerbaijan, followed by Iceland.
Thank you. Today, the free pluralistic press with reference to the leading world standards has been developed in Azerbaijan. The state has created all necessary conditions for free development of mass media. So effective from August 6, 1998, the Menace Administration on Protection of State Secrets in Press and other mass media under the Cabinet of Ministers was liquidated by the decree of the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Repeal of censorship was in keeping with the general outlook of development of Azerbaijan as a democratic society. Measures deemed in the decree promoted the development of independent mass media, completely assured citizens in freedom of thought, speech and information in accord with international law, denoted in United Nations Declaration on Human Rights as well as the Constitution of the Republic of Azerbaijan. The law of Azerbaijan Republic about mass media was adopted in December of 1999, providing freedom of speech and thought, independence of press, journalists, prohibiting applications of measures which limit freedom of press. Any interference of administrative, official, legal activities of mass media, his application of censorship, breach of professional independence, illegal suspension or halt production and distribution of mass media, illegal circulation, seizure, as well as the violation of the other rights, invoke civil, administrative, criminal, and other liabilities in accord with the legislation in Azerbaijan. Today, hundreds of media outlets operate in the country quite freely and in safety conditions. Journalists carry out their professional duties without any obstacles. Journalists aren't held accountable for professional activity in Azerbaijan, just like in developed Western countries. For this reason, we see unacceptable the attempts of some foreign circles to distort reality in Azerbaijan, unreasonably combining individual situations to harm the country's democratic image, and we call on them to refrain from such an approach. Generally, within the process of investigation or decision to require exemption them by some international organizations or NGOs, it is valued as a pressure on law enforcement bodies in Azerbaijan. In different countries, we can witness pressure on journalists. No country is idle. If an Azerbaijani journalist is charged with treason, this is presented as a violation of freedom of speech and to be signed or journalist by the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last on the list of interventions is delegation of Iceland, and then we'll go for the right to reply. And the first on my list will be delegation of Turkey. So, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Last but not least, as we sometimes say in Iceland. I will be extremely brief. I just wanted to inform you and share with you that 2 weeks ago, the representative on the freedom of the media was on a visit in Iceland. And this was the first visit of the office to my country. During the visit, Madam Mijatovic met with ministers, members of parliament, NGOs, journalists, and experts, and had an exchange with students in an open meeting at the university where she gave a speech. I believe it was a pretty good visit. Different views were expressed and debated in an open and frank atmosphere. And following this short visit, my authorities have been in contact with her experts, with the office's experts, on how Iceland can better promote free speech and free media. And the reason I am telling you this and sharing this sort of as the last speaker on this list is perhaps because I think it's a small example, one of many in fact, on how this office and how this institution really works and how it can work in our favor. Another example was shared by my distinguished German colleague just a minute ago when she was explaining the engagement that her authorities had with the RFOM on Netzpolitik. So in short, the RFOM has a clear mandate. It has license to criticize, as we sometimes say, and that should come as no surprise. We gave that license to the office. So we should use it and we should embrace it. Therefore, on a final note, allow me to join others in thanking you, Madam Mijatovic, and your able team for your energetic, impartial, and professional work throughout the last couple of years. You certainly have Iceland's support.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Before turning to the delegation of Turkey for the right to reply, just to note that the interpreters will have to leave at 6:10. So after that will be in English only. So, delegation of Turkey for your right to reply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have taken the floor many times in the past to emphasize the important strides Turkey has made in the area of furthering the freedom of expression and media. In this connection, I wish to reaffirm that no Turkish legislation includes any provision that would lead to imprisonment of journalists on account of their journalistic work. Everyone is equal before the law without any distinction as to their profession. Regarding the criticisms voiced with respect to the recent attacks against media institutions, I need to remind us of the escalated terror attacks in my country. Following these brutal terrorist attacks, some distressing incidents took place, mainly provoked by the public outburst due to these acts of terrorism. The attacks targeting newspapers' headquarters are unacceptable and were strongly condemned by the government. The perpetrators of the attacks have swiftly been brought to justice, and the security forces have promptly intensified measures for the protection of media institutions. Finally, we are determined to expand the scope of freedom of expression and will further address any shortcomings, also by continuing our fruitful cooperation with the Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media, whose work is highly commendable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Apologize to the delegation of Italy for not announcing them, but they are next on my list, followed by Spain.
Grazie moderatore.
Thank you very much. I fully subscribe to the statement made by the representative of the European Union, and in my national capacity, I'd like to refer to comments made about the security of journalists. Italy appreciates and supports the work done by the representative on freedom of the media and takes very seriously the cases that she draws our attention to. Recently, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs transmitted information about threats against journalists and cases of in Italy. We continue to follow very closely these cases and to cooperate with the representative on the freedom of the media. I should like to add two further pieces of information. The first is operational, that is that the Ministry of the Interior, the Department for Public Security, which issues instructions for the safeguard and security of journalists. The other is a more general note that this theme is a part of the fight against organized crime continuing in our country for years. And from this perspective, we are very committed to these negotiations to come up with a drafted decision during the Serbian chairmanship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the delegation of Spain, followed by Hungary.
Muchas gracias, señor moderador. Quisiera en primer lugar agradecer a la señora.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think that excellent work has been done by Madame Mijatovic to ensure the safety of journalists. Now, we would like to take advantage of this opportunity and to refer to a concern that has been expressed by representatives of the media concerning a law in Spain that could undermine the work of journalists. Well, we have a law that was enacted by the Spanish Parliament, and in accordance with this law, the situation, in fact, will improve for journalists. It is subject to legal control. Any limitation of fundamental rights has to be in accordance with the law. We are signatories to various conventions. I mean, it really is an issue of appropriate proportionality. And we would like, once again, to note that our country pays particular attention to protecting the rights of all to express their opinions. Thank you.
This delegation of Hungary, followed by Turkmenistan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We fully align with the statement of the EU. However, I would like to make a few remarks in my national capacity. With regard to the statement delivered by the distinguished US delegation, to have a serious conversation, we need to have concrete statements to deal with. To claim that the press does not enjoy the utmost freedom in Hungary is without any foundation. We stand behind OSCE commitments that guarantee the exercise of freedom of expression, the blessing of which Hungarians have had the fortune to enjoy ever since the fall of communism. With regard to the statement of the representative of media freedom, given that the assault on the Hungarian border had been going for hours, journalists have plenty of opportunity to report about it. Journalists were given fair warning multiple times in multiple languages before the police action started. It is unfortunate that representatives of the press were caught up in that action, yet a violent assault on the state border that leaves also 14 policemen injured is a serious matter and will be met by appropriate action from the authorities. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Turkmenistan, followed by Lithuania.
Thank you very much. I'd like briefly to comment on the presentation made by one of the civil society representatives. I'd also like to begin by thanking Dunya Mijatovic for her work on improving media freedom in our countries. And I'd like to refer specifically now to the statement made by Radio Free Europe. Now, in terms of our cooperation in the OSCE on freedom of the media, we are now seeing positive results in this area. There were two names mentioned, Mr. Nepiskuliev. I don't agree that he is someone who is helping reporters. All of the information is on our embassy site in Austria, information regarding this person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to the delegation of Lithuania, followed by delegation of Tajikistan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We took note on the information provided by the Russian delegation concerning freedom of the media in the Republic of Lithuania. In response, I would like just to stress in my national capacity that Commission of the Public Broadcaster of Lithuania took the decision, which was endorsed by the court, to request national broadcasters to suspend temporarily for the 3 months period for propaganda for retransmission of certain program parts of the TV channel RTR Planeta. This decision was taken strictly following the Council of Europe's Convention on Transfrontier Television and existing national laws which prohibit incitement for war. Also, as Russian delegation rightly admitted itself, measures taken by Commission of the Public Broadcaster of Lithuania against RTR Planeta are compatible with European Union law as ruled out by the European Commission. When discussing freedom of expression issue, I would like to suggest to Russian delegation firstly to stop questioning Dunya Mijatovic's mandate and listen to her today's message that one has to clearly distinguish between the freedom of the media and the situation when the state-owned media is used as the tool for spreading propaganda of war, hate speech and instigating hatred. International Convention on Civil and Political Rights also clearly states that countries are allowed to prohibit law any propaganda for war. Therefore, this raised issue has nothing to do with the violation of rights to freedom of expression or restriction of freedom of the media. I thank you, Moderator.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Tajikistan, followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you. The law on the print and other media enacted in 2012 with active consultation by independent media and NGOs, has defined the responsibility for individuals and for institutions for information that they disseminate. Now, insofar as the way the events of November are covered in the media, this was fully covered by all media, including fully independent ones. After these events, a number of individuals having engaged in criminal activities, and that was quite natural. Now, insofar as obtaining official information through the official press agency is concerned, that is not something that prevents in any way the information from being impartial because it is provided through different channels.
Followed by delegation of Ukraine.
Thank you. With respect to the situation with freedom of speech in Crimea, there were very politicized comments made here. Of course, some journalists left Crimea after it joined the Russian Federation. This is unavoidable. They decided to do so because they were Ukrainian citizens and wanted to work in Ukraine. Now, there is a separate federal law, and an accreditation system was worked out for media representatives in Crimea. With respect to crimes against journalists in the Donbass, in the context of the violation by Russia of the rights of the media, I should like to recall that Donbass is not the territory of the Russian Federation. We are also concerned about the events taking place there, and we hope that Ukraine will fully investigate the crimes against journalists. We are carrying out an investigation on Nadia Savchenko, who, as you know, has been accused of the murder of journalists. With respect to the law on undesirable civil society organizations, which has been accused of violating the freedom of expression, it does not do so. And we call on countries to work actively on the working out the draft decision for the ministerial in Belgrade. And I'd like to recall that the Russian Federation was one of the first to propose this. Thank you.
I think the translators will have to leave now, so I would like to thank them very much for facilitating our discussion today, and we can continue working in English for a little bit longer. So thank you very much. And I pass the floor to the delegation of Ukraine.
Thank you. I want to answer a previous Russian representative regarding Crimean Tatars' rights violation in Crimea by previous governments. First, our previous president and 2 times prime minister Yanukovych, after his crimes against humanity during Maidan, is hiding in your country. So, second, Ukraine now has accepted the new law for Crimean Tatars recognized as an indigenous population and an official nation minority within Ukraine. Third, Russian banned totally Crimean Tatars language, Crimean media, and news agency, and even Mejlis. The fourth, Russia is now started real genocide of Crimean Tatars there, imprisoning Crimean journalists and activists. Crimean Tatars are disappearing like it was in Stalin times. We have special materials which are describing this situation. And we have, if you want to get these materials, you are welcome to come to our delegation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on my list is the delegation of France, followed by the delegations of Armenia and then Azerbaijan. So, delegation of France, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président de séance. Par principe et en fonction des procédures de l'OSCE, un regret que les traducteurs s'en aillent et que nous ne puissions pas nous conformer aux règles de travail à l'OSCE. En réponse aux références faites en début de séance sur le blocage administratif de sites internet terroristes en France, j'aimerais apporter les précisions suivantes. 1. Le blocage administratif en France répond à une procédure strictement définie par la loi, qui s'inscrit dans le cadre de la lutte contre le terrorisme telle que définie par la loi de 2014. Il ne s'agit pas d'une procédure arbitraire ni discrétionnaire qui viserait à limiter la liberté d'expression en France ou bien à faire pression sur des journalistes pour leurs opinions. Les modalités en sont définies par décret du 4 février 2015. Elle empêche l'accès des internautes aux sites incitant à la commission d'actes de terrorisme ou en faisant l'apologie. 2. La mesure de blocage administratif n'a vocation à intervenir qu'en dernier recours, après que l'administration ait demandé le retrait des contenus litigieux à l'éditeur ou à l'hébergeur. 3. Cette demande fait l'objet d'un contrôle d'une Commission nationale de l'informatique et des libertés. 4. Tout citoyen qui s'estimerait lésé dans ses droits par ce blocage peut se tourner vers la justice et demander réparation. Merci.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the delegation of Armenia, followed by Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to refer to the points made by the Armenian NGO here. I would like to stress that the authorities of Armenia address each and every case of violence which involves journalists. We cannot agree that there is a sharp increase in cases. There is no any case of imprisonment, criminal offense, serious physical harm done to journalists. And there was a reference to the property damage of journalists on June 24th. I would like to stress that the police recognized itself, its own shortcomings, and provided compensation for damaged property. And on further days of mass protest in Armenia, there was no any case of violence which involved journalists, which meant that the police rectified its conduct. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the floor to the delegation of Azerbaijan before giving the final words to the representative on freedom of the media.
Thank you. There was presented the case of death reporter of Anaz Rasim Aliyev as a pressure on journalist and tried to politicize his death. The incident took place on the personal grounds and offenders arrested at the earliest possible date. But the journalists Alison Parker and Adam Ward, who killed on 26th of August, was present on personal grounds too. Most international organizations did not touch this theme at all, although since 2010, including these two journalists, the number of killed journalists reached 8 in USA. According to the opening session, the Armenian side mentioned about the so-called crackdown civil society of Azerbaijan, and I would like to give an answer very shortly. A few days ago, Vahan Martirosyan, head of the International Liberation Movement Initiative, sought political asylum in Azerbaijan. He has fled Armenia for Azerbaijan to seek political asylum for his and for his safety.
It's a point of order from...
For its activities, the pro-opposition International Liberation Movement Initiative, led by Martirosyan, has faced persecution from Armenian state authorities and different officials. You cannot witness Azerbaijan side this kind of case. If Azerbaijan would be a country that Armenian side described, the Armenian head of the NGO would not have fled and feel yourself safety in Azerbaijan. Thank you very much.
Armenia.
I would like to address point of order here. It is unacceptable to violate rules of procedures here and to bring the right of replies from one session to another session. If Azerbaijani delegation was not able to respond to my points at that session, it does not have rights to do it at this session. Otherwise, I would also ask additional point of reply for me. Thank you.
I agree, that's why I interrupted. So thank you very much, all of you who took the floor here. I would like to especially thank the members of the civil society who are here to enrich and deepen our debates and discussion on media freedom. I would like to thank our introducers as well. And before concluding this session, I would just like to give the floor to our representative on freedom of the media for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Fran. I'll be very brief. I know that you're all tired, and we had to go through some not easy statements and not easy issues that many of you have to raise. Of course, I'm not going to touch upon any of the statements by participating states. I think I already made statements, and I think I was already clear. There was only one remark that I would like to mention, and I think this should be noted. One representative of civil society who left by now stated that at the international conference I called Azerbaijani government criminal regime. This is simply not true. I'm known for being very direct. I'm known for not being very diplomatic. I'm known for not really following the rules when I have to address issues of concern in participating states, particularly if we talk about imprisonment, death, and all these issues that are concerning human beings. But I do not use this kind of language. I do try to address issues with Azerbaijani government constantly. I do try to visit Baku, and this is also, once again, my call to visit Baku and also to visit prisons, not for the first time, in order to try to assist the country, which definitely has problems with the freedom of media. But what I do not like is when I'm accused and when certain representatives are sent here in order to spread false information. With this in mind, as many of you mentioned already, this is my last time at the HDM as the representative on freedom of the media. I know for many this is a relief, and but I'm very realistic, as you know. I would like to particularly thank civil society, all journalists, all the organizations for their constant support, for their cooperation, for their trust in this institution, not only during my tenure, but also during the tenure of my two predecessors, Raimond Duve and Miklos Harasti. Without them, it would be not possible to address all these issues that we are addressing, and also to fairly execute my mandate. Civil society organizations remain our eyes and ears on the grounds, and as such they should be preserved from any form of state intervention or pressure. At the same time, I would like to thank all the governments and for all these statements that I heard today. I can only say that I'm very proud of the work my team did. And I thank you very much for your genuine support, for your criticism, for your different views, because that's also part of the game, if I can say so. But at the same time, I would also call you to be more realistic and to do more in order to help civil society and journalists working in your countries. And my last words refer to the institution, to the Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media, and the mandate which I still exercise. Institutions and responsibilities are fortunately beyond people who temporarily hold them. I therefore ask you to keep and preserve the institution as it is, as well as to protect the mandate in its full strength. This is important for the societies, this is important for our OSCE region, no matter how much I, as your representative at the moment, or the next one, will make you angry. It is, again, part of the game. You need to listen to us in order to be able to address issues of concern in your countries. It cannot be that everything is rosy and everything is perfect. I do not think we would have the OSCE if the situation is like that. So please be more realistic and please embrace the work and accept the work of people heading the institutions. I would like to also thank HDM for organizing this meeting year by year, bringing civil society and governments together at one table. It is extremely important, and I hope it will continue in the future. This is by no means a goodbye. It is in a way a revoir, and I will continue to exercise my mandate, no less, not more, in full up to the last day, I think, but I still have a few months to go, and believe me, I'm not going to shy away on pointing finger on all sides. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And on this, I think we can close the meeting. And I would just like to remind you to leave the headsets behind when you leave. Thank you very much.